Chapter 4094. There was no such thing as an impenetrable wall. Even though Ji Tianqing hadn't leaked any information, even Nangong Buhua and the leaders of the 8 factions had been kept in the dark. However, the ambushers and generals of the realm of true martial quickly sensed that something was amiss. The imperial tutor personally oversaw the realm of true martial and commanded more than 3,000 divine lords and over 100 godly kings to set up an inescapable net. He'd set up dozens of large formations in an area of 100,000 miles, one after another. As long as the Meng Shuai brought more than 2,000 soldiers and escorted Nangong Ao back to the realm of true martial. More than 5,000 divine lords, over 100 godly kings and 2 peak godly kings. It was easy to imagine that Kenshin wouldn't be able to return alive. However, one day before the Meng Shuai was to return to the realm of true martial, the imperial tutor suddenly couldn't contact him. One day later, not only did he lose contact with the Meng Shuai, but he also didn't return to the realm of true martial on time. He couldn't contact any of the 3 divine warships and 2,000 soldiers under his command. At that time, the imperial tutor realized that something was amiss. In order not to leak any information, he secretly sent a group of experts to the south to search. The result was indisputable. The group of experts split into 3 groups and searched the 3 routes that the Meng Shuai took back to the realm of true martial, but to no avail. From then on, the imperial tutor realized that something had happened to the Meng Shuai, and that the 2,000 soldiers were most likely dead. The 3,000 experts lying in ambush in the realm of true martial also had a bad feeling. Rumors began to spread in the army and many people secretly discussed it. On the 14th of April, the imperial tutor was certain that the Meng Shuai had most likely been intercepted and killed on his way back. He no longer held out hope that the Meng Shuai could return safely. At the same time, the news spread throughout the realm of true martial, and tens of millions of people fought over it. As a result, the news of Meng Shuai being killed by a mysterious powerhouse spread like wildfire from the Zhenwu domain to the entire Boundless Heaven continent. In the past 2 months, the top forces of the entire Boundless Heaven continent had been paying attention to the battle between the Kenshin Rebel Alliance, the Imperial Tutor and the Meng Shuai. It wasn't just the 18 ancient clans and 36 top forces. Even over 100 domain lords, close to 1,000 God King experts, and billions of civilians were paying attention and discussing this matter. After all, this unprecedented battle was related to the ownership of the Boundless Heaven continent and also determined the fate and future of hundreds of billions of people. The hundreds of billions of people living in the abyss of suffering naturally leaned towards the Kenshin, hoping that the Kenshin could overthrow the dark reign of the Shura God Emperor and end their suffering. However, these common people had no strength, influence, or status. They also had no right to speak. They could not support Kenshin with their actions, so they could only silently pray for Kenshin. Only the 100 domain lords, 36 top forces, and 18 ancient clans were qualified to participate in this unprecedented battle. Now, before the battle between the Rebel Alliance, the Imperial Tutor and the Meng Shuai had officially begun, news of Meng Shuai's death had already spread. At first, everyone expressed disbelief when they heard this news. However, when everyone calmed down and thought about it carefully, who would dare to spread rumors and spread news of Meng Shuai's death at this critical juncture? That was a heinous crime that could kill even one's friends and family. Moreover, the news came from the Zhenwu domain, so it was highly credible. As a result, the entire Boundless Heaven continent was in an uproar. Many top forces, domain lords and God King experts as well as billions of civilians, discussed and vied with each other to spread this news. In just 2 short days, this news had spread to every corner of the Boundless Heaven continent. Almost everyone's first reaction was disbelief, followed by shock and surprise. As long as one was not a fool, one could guess that in the entire Boundless Heaven continent, who had the courage, speed and strength to kill the Meng Shuai who was protected by more than 2,000 soldiers? It could only be Kenshin. In fact, no one else in the entire realm of the gods could do it. Only Kenshin could create such a miracle. Most people did not know the inside story, nor did they know that Kenshin had only left the Yenshu Grotto heaven a few days ago. It was impossible for him to kill the Meng Shuai so quickly. 95% of the people only knew that the battle between Kenshin, the Imperial Tutor, and the Meng Shuai had already begun. Moreover, in the first round of battle, Kenshin had emerged victorious. He had killed the Meng Shuai and eliminated one of the 2 leaders of the Boundless Heaven continent as soon as he made his move. How shocking and morale-boosting was this? Billions of civilians saw the dawn of hope and were filled with confidence and anticipation for Kenshin. From their point of view, Kenshin had dealt a heavy blow to the imperial tutor and the Meng Shuai from the very beginning. Next, he would be able to easily sweep across the boundless heaven continent and destroy the Azura God Emperor's forces. When the territorial lords, ancient clans and top forces heard the news, they were shocked and in disbelief. Their emotions became even more complicated. They knew the inside story and that Kenshin had only left the Yenshu Grotto heaven a few days ago. At this moment, Kenshin should have just arrived at the domain of True Martial. However, Kenshin did not even go to the domain of True Martial. He had already killed the Meng Shuai a few days ago. This was too bizarre and too horrifying. Could it be that Kenshin had mastered some kind of spatial leap that allowed him to cross half a domain at once? Otherwise, how could he have arrived at the domain of True Martial in such a short time, set up an ambush halfway, and successfully killed the Meng Shuai and more than 2,000 soldiers? Everyone knew that the battle was chaotic. Even if Kenshin had killed the Meng Shuai, some of the 2,000 soldiers would have escaped. In fact, the Meng Shuai and the 2,400 soldiers had disappeared. They might have all been killed. This indicated that the sword god must have utilized a ceiling array formation to be able to capture Meng Shuai and the others in one fell swoop. If he had to set up a ceiling formation, it would have taken a lot of time. In that case, it was very likely that Kenshin had mastered the technique to cross half a domain in a single step. This made no sense at all. When the top forces and immortal kings analyzed this, they could not help but gasp. Their hearts were filled with fear and shock. Especially the 100 territorial lords and the forces under the Azura God Emperor. They were deeply uneasy and could not suppress the fear in their hearts. Even the Meng Shuai had been easily killed by Kenshin. If Kenshin's rebel alliance attacked them, who could survive? No one could. The forces that had been wavering on the fence felt the most conflicted. On one hand, they marveled at Kenshin's terrifying strength, and on the other, they regretted not making the decision to join the Kenshin rebel alliance sooner. Otherwise, they would be celebrating excitedly and waiting to share the fruits of their victory. Some of the clan leaders and sect masters gathered their elders and protectors to discuss whether they should join the rebel alliance as soon as possible. After all, this was their last chance. When the final battle between the rebel alliance and the imperial tutor began, it would be too late for them to join. Chapter 4095. To be able to become the top clans and forces in the boundless heaven continent, the leaders must have the corresponding shrewdness. There were many things and reasons that everyone was well aware of. If they did not seize the opportunity this time, they would not be able to join the rebel alliance. After all, the 9 forces led by Kenshin were enough to kill the imperial tutor and destroy the Shura God Emperor's forces. What was the use of these forces? If they were in Kenshin's shoes, they would not agree either. Therefore, the leaders and powerhouses of several forces had to make a decision within 2 days. Of course, there were still more than a dozen forces that continued to remain neutral and observe the situation. These people had different ideas. Although they also wanted to overthrow the Shura God Emperor's rule and restore the glory and power of the past. However, they would not participate in the war personally to avoid attracting disaster. They did not side with the Shura God Emperor because they did not want to be lackeys, grovel, and oppose the Kenshin. They did not side with the Kenshin and join the rebel alliance because they did not want to take the risk of starting a war with the Shura God Emperor. Even if they received news that the Kenshin had killed the Meng Shuai, they also knew that the Kenshin was very powerful. However, they knew that even if the Kenshin killed the Meng Shuai and the imperial tutor and took control of the boundless heaven continent, it would only be temporary. As long as the Shura God Emperor was not dead, he would definitely seek revenge on the Kenshin whenever he returned to the boundless heaven continent. When that time came, Kenshin would most likely be killed by the Shura God Emperor. The boundless heaven continent would still be in the hands of the Shura God Emperor. The outcome would not change. If the Kenshin was killed, the forces that joined the rebel alliance would not have a good ending. All in all, these forces that remained neutral and observed the situation wanted to protect themselves. No matter how the situation in the boundless heaven continent changed, they only wanted to protect the foundation that had been passed down for tens of thousands of years. Bai Long drove the deity-slaying warship and sped high in the sky. In another day, the battleship would be able to return to Yenshu's cave. At this moment, a communication jade slip flew from the sky and entered the pilot's cabin. It floated beside the white dragon, shining brightly. White Dragon knew at a glance that this was a message sent to his master by someone else. However, his master was cultivating in the distorted space-time of the Divine Pagoda. The jade slip could not enter the Divine Pagoda, so his master could not receive it. Of course, the White Dragon would not receive the jade slip without permission, nor would it check the information inside. However, he thought that there might be something important waiting for his master to deal with. He couldn't delay it. Therefore, he used his consciousness to send a message to Zhi Tianqing, who was in the distorted space and time. Zhi Tianqing was not in seclusion. He was just cultivating. When he heard the White Dragon's call, he woke up. Only 3 days had passed in the outside world, but he had already been cultivating in the distorted space-time for 5 months. Now that his strength and spirit had fully recovered, he had reached his peak state. Shua. With a flash of white light, Zhi Tianqing appeared in the cockpit of the battleship. White Dragon hurriedly got up and bowed. Zhi Tianqing nodded slightly, indicating that he should focus on driving the battleship. He picked up the jade slip and knew at a glance that it was from Nangong Buhua. His consciousness entered the jade slip, and Nangong Buhua's voice immediately sounded in his mind. Young Master Dragon, now the entire boundless heaven continent is spreading that you killed Meng Shuai and more than 2,000 soldiers under his command. None of them were left alive. The news spread, and the entire boundless heaven continent was talking about it. Everyone was shocked. The patriarchs and sect masters also knew about this. They couldn't believe it and came to ask me. They all guessed the truth of the matter and joined forces to ask me to send you a message to verify the truth. Just now, after the meeting in the Divine Light Palace, I sent them back for the time being. However, they will definitely come again tonight to ask for the result. Nangong Buhua knew the truth. After Zhi Tianqing finished the battle, he sent him a message to explain the situation and the result of the battle. However, Nangong Buhua had kept it a secret and did not reveal it to anyone. Even though he was pestered by the patriarchs and sect masters, he did not announce the result on his own. Instead, he asked Zhi Tianqing first. Zhi Tianqing was quite satisfied with this. He picked up the communication jade slip and sent a message to Nangong Buhua. Since the entire boundless heaven continent has spread the news, there's no need to hide it. It's about time. You can tell them the truth. Tell them that I'm on the way back to Xianxia Grotto Heaven. Ask their disciples to speed up. After replying to this message, Zhi Tianqing returned to the distorted space-time and continued to cultivate. On the other hand, Nangong Buhua was secretly relieved after receiving the message. After all, the reaction of the 7 patriarchs and Su Balian was a little too strong. They joined forces to give him a lot of pressure. Fortunately, Zhi Tianqing relented. Otherwise, there might be some awkwardness or unpleasantness. After all, the 8 experts felt that they were cheated and did not trust him. A day passed quickly. On the evening of the 2nd day, the god-slaying battleship arrived at Xianxia Grotto Heaven. After entering Xianxia Grotto Heaven, the battleship flew across the sky at lightning speed and went straight to the main peak of the Light Palace. When the battleship arrived at the square outside the Light Palace, Nangong Buhua, the 7 patriarchs, Su Balian and the others had been waiting for a long time. Everyone had a smile on their faces. They were excited and warmly welcomed Zhi Tianqing back. Zhi Tianqing kept the battleship and landed on the square alone. He responded to everyone's greetings and salutes. After the greetings were over, Zhi Tianqing did not go to rest. He walked into the Light Palace surrounded by the crowd. The leaders of the 9 forces gathered in the Light Palace. Zhi Tianqing took the opportunity to discuss matters. He first announced the results of the operation and then talked about the next step of the plan. Although I've successfully intercepted and killed Meng Shuai, destroyed more than 2,000 soldiers under his command and rescued Nangong Ao, the traps and ambushes of the Zhenwu domain have been destroyed. However, this is only the beginning of the war. The enemy has lost their leader, Meng Shuai, the Imperial Tutor, Patrol Commander Qian, and many other Divine King experts. Especially Qian. He and Meng Shuai split up and captured the 8th Elder in the northwest. They then beheaded the 8th Elder in public. Not only do we have to save Nangong Ao, but we also have to avenge the 8th Elder. Moreover, Qian is also at the top of the death list. He is one of the targets that must be eliminated. Therefore, I will depart today to kill Qian. No one expected Zhi Tianqing to announce the next step of the plan without discussing it with the others. However, if he could kill Meng Shuai, it would be easy for him to kill Qian. However, they still had to express their opinions and show their concern. Alliance Master, you have just returned from a mission. You should rest for 2 days before killing Qian. That's right. You are our leader. You shouldn't put yourself in danger so many times. Everyone is worried about your safety. Alliance Master, I am willing to lead the 4 elders of my clan to follow you into battle. I am also willing to follow you to kill Qian. Chapter 4096. Everyone present was a sly old fox. Of course, they knew how to seize the opportunity to take the credit. Qian was not strong. He was only in the 9th level of the Divine King realm. Many of the experts present were confident that they could kill him. However, Qian was of noble status. He was the commander of the patrol. Killing him would be a great achievement. In Ji Tianxing's death list, Qian was one of the top 5 important figures. The first was the imperial tutor and the second was the Meng Shuai. If they followed Ji Tianxing to kill Qian, they could help Ji Tianxing and protect his reputation. At the same time, they could get credit for killing Qian. Most importantly, Ji Tianxing had easily killed Qian. Perhaps they didn't even need to do anything to get the credit. Who would not want to take advantage of such an opportunity? Therefore, the patriarchs of the 7 clans and Su Bai Lian eagerly signed up to go with Ji Tianxing. Unfortunately, Ji Tianxing rejected all of them. I have Qian's whereabouts. You don't have to follow me. I can handle it. Don't forget that the mission I gave you is more important. So many days have passed and there are only a few days left before the deadline. When will your disciples arrive? Hearing Ji Tianxing's question, the clan leaders and clan leaders were stunned for a moment. Then they explained with a smile. Don't worry, Alliance Master. Our disciples are rushing at full speed. They will definitely arrive at Yenshu's heavenly abode before the deadline. How could we disobey the Alliance leader's orders? Don't worry, Alliance Master. Our clan will also arrive on time. Our disciples are rushing at full speed. They will arrive in 3 days at the latest. The clan leaders and clan leaders all said that their disciples would arrive on time. Ji Tianxing did not urge them anymore. He said in a dignified tone, "It will take me at least 8 days to kill Qian. The deadline will be up in 5 days and all the members of the Rebel Alliance will be here. When the time comes, you will have to follow the original plan and fight separately. Eliminate the targets and forces on the death list. The performance and contribution of each force will determine the rewards after the war. I hope that everyone can fight for the common goal and not for selfish reasons. If you think you can hide it from me, then go ahead and try. Don't say that I didn't warn you." His tone was very cold and the threat in it was self-evident. The faces of all the patriarchs and sect masters stiffened, and a trace of nervousness and shame flashed through their eyes. Although they maintained a smile on the surface and repeatedly said that they did not dare. But in reality, everyone was vigilant in their hearts and hurriedly put away those selfish thoughts. In front of Kenshin, they did not dare to play tricks. Especially since Kenshin had already warned them in public. If they dared to do it again, they would really be cutting themselves off from the Rebel Alliance. At that time, the Kenshin would not welcome them and might even expel them from the Rebel Alliance. They had the mark of the Rebel Alliance and were mortal enemies with the Imperial Tutor. If they offended both sides, they would have nowhere to go and their fates would be miserable. Such a consequence caused every force to be alarmed. Soon the meeting was over. All the patriarchs, sect masters and god kings left the meeting hall. Ji Tianxing stayed in the hall and reminded Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang of many things. When they walked out of the hall, the patriarchs and sect masters were not in a hurry to leave. They went to a secluded area and pretended to take a stroll in the garden, but in reality, they were communicating and discussing what had just happened. Before this, everyone thought that Kenshin did not trust us enough and even hid it from us. Everyone was a little angry and wanted to wait for Kenshin to come back so that we could have a heart-to-heart talk with him. But now, everyone can see that Kenshin did not hide this and even reminded everyone in public. Yes. At this point, I am not afraid of everyone blaming me. Actually, how shrewd is Kenshin? How can he not see that everyone has their own selfish motives? In the past he did not point it out, but this time, since everyone wanted to make things difficult for him, he might as well point it out. So, everyone should settle down and do what they want to do. In that case, Kenshin left everyone some face. Previously we all had our own selfish motives, so he was unwilling to trust us. If after today, everyone is still like before, I'm afraid Kenshin will be very disappointed. So everyone take care of yourselves. Don't have any more unrealistic fantasies. We have already joined the Rebel Alliance. This is something that the entire Boundless Heaven continent knows. Only by doing things wholeheartedly can we obtain Kenshin's recognition, trust, and reward. Don't forget, when the alliance was established they talked about basic benefits. Just now, Kenshin also said that after we succeed in quelling the rebels, he will still reward us according to our contributions. That's right. No matter what everyone thinks, our War God clan will not be a burden anymore. From now on we will earnestly carry out all of Kenshin's orders. Our Jiang clan has never complained about Kenshin and has always followed orders. The Lan clan is also following orders and is most loyal to Kenshin. Everyone, please don't count our Lan clan in. Previously it was you guys who were making a ruckus and wanted to ask for an explanation from Kenshin. Our Phoenix clan did not participate. The 7 clan leaders and Su Balian were all shrewd people. They immediately analyzed the situation and knew what to do from now on. Thus, everyone became righteous and loyal to the Sword God, as if they were not going to wallow in the mire with the rest of the Sword Gods. Thus the 8 factions all had the intention to compete with each other. They all wanted to compete in future missions to see who could make a great contribution and obtain Kenshin's favor. In the Great Light Hall, the door was tightly shut and only Ji Tianxing, Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang were in the hall. Nangong Buhua frowned and said worriedly, "Young Master Long, before you came back the 8 clan leaders and sect leader were still making a ruckus and wanted to ask for an explanation from you. After all, you lied to them before and made them feel that they were not trusted. Just now, you exposed their selfishness in front of everyone and even threatened them. I'm worried." Before he could finish, Ji Tianxing interrupted him and chuckled. "What are you worried about? Are you afraid that they will be disloyal, selfish and not loyal to the Rebel Alliance?" Sigh. Nangong Buhua did not say anything and only sighed in agreement. Nangong Nihuang was also a little worried. They don't want to take the risk and lose their own forces, but they want to gain credit. It's really hard to explain. Young Master, our alliance has just been established, and the trust between us still needs to be built up bit by bit. Don't be too hasty. This father and daughter pair had nothing to say about Ji Tianxing, but they were also worried sick about the Rebel Alliance. Ji Tianxing waved his hand and comforted them. Don't worry, those 8 guys are not fools and naturally know what to do. They have already joined the Rebel Alliance and have no way out. The only way out is to follow my orders and do things honestly and do as much as possible. So your worries are unnecessary. Moreover, I reminded them today because I don't want to punish them after the matter really happens. Chapter 4097. As the saying goes, the ugly things should be said first. Since the Rebel Alliance had just been formed, Ji Tianxing had to bring up the problem before anything awkward or unpleasant happened. This way they could avoid dealing with those factions after the matter really happened, which would make it very difficult for everyone. Most importantly, Ji Tianxing's forces, methods and schemes were all here. Even the Imperial Tutor and the Meng Shuai had suffered greatly in his hands, let alone the other 8 forces. Therefore no one dared to fall out with him and could only obediently follow his orders. After listening to Ji Tianxing's explanation, Nangong Buhua and his daughter heaved a sigh of relief. Since Ji Tianxing was confident that he could defeat those 8 forces, they had nothing to worry about. Then Nangong Buhua continued to report, "Young Master Long, just before you came back I received 4 messages." Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and the corners of his mouth curled into a playful smile as he asked, "It's those forces that waver and watch in the dark, right?" Nangong Buhua quickly nodded and said, "Yes. Yesterday the news of the Meng Shuai's assassination spread. Today they eagerly sent a message to express their willingness to join the Rebel Alliance." Nangong Nihuang curled her lips in disdain and said, "These guys are too arrogant. They think they are very smart, but they are actually a bunch of clowns. Now that they saw you easily kill the Meng Shuai and more than 2,000 experts, they finally made up their minds." Since Nangong Buhua had already said what he wanted to say, he did not make any more comments and asked directly, "Young Master Long, how do you think we should deal with this matter? Do you agree or disagree?" Ji Tianxing smiled and said, "When the Rebel Alliance was just formed I already said it. As long as those clans and top forces are willing to help us overthrow the Shura God Emperor, I will not reject them. Of course I have to agree. However, I am not in a hurry to give them an answer. In the next 2 days, There should be a few more forces that have made up their minds and sent messages to request to join us. When the time comes, we will deal with them together. Nangong Buhua immediately revealed a fox-like smile as if he understood. He nodded and said, "Okay, let's do as you say. Let's leave them alone first." After hesitating for a moment, he asked again, "Young Master Long, may I ask what kind of treatment do you plan to give those forces if they join the rebel alliance?" Before Ji Tianxing could answer, Nangong Nihuang frowned and said, "They joined later and obviously do not have the determination and sincerity." Ji Tianxing smiled and said, "Of course they don't have the qualifications to talk about conditions, but if you want them to work hard, you still have to promise them certain benefits. How about this? I'll grant them a region of land, limited to their respective regions. If they think the conditions are too." Nangong Buhua said with a playful smile, "Of course. If they want to haggle, then tell them to scram." Being able to get them to join the alliance and obtain a region of land was already good enough. At the very least, they would be able to preserve their foundation after the matter was settled. Those forces that go against us can't even protect their 10,000 years of foundation. Comparing the two, they will be satisfied. Ji Tianxing nodded and said, "Very good, I will leave this matter to you. Also, I have divided the death list into two and will give it to you now. You will lead those forces to deal with the experts and forces on the first list. I will command those 3 forces to deal with the second list." Nangong Buhua nodded and asked, "Nangong Ao and the 8th Elder have not collected enough information, and the death list is only 80% complete. What about the remaining 20%? Do we still need to send people to investigate?" "No need." Ji Tianxing waved his hand and said, "When we fight with the Imperial Tutor, many forces hiding in the dark will jump out. Even if there are some forces hiding very deeply, don't bother about them for now. After we take control of the Boundless Heaven continent, you can slowly investigate and eliminate them. You must know that even if we take control of the Boundless Heaven continent, you will still have many things to do." When Nangong Buhua heard this, not only did he not feel tired, but he also felt flattered and pleasantly surprised. Of course, he understood the meaning behind Ji Tianxing's words. He was clearly saying that after Ji Tianxing took control of the Boundless Heaven continent, he would go to other continents. And as Ji Tianxing's spokesperson, he would take control of the Boundless Heaven continent. What kind of glory and power was this? It also showed how much Ji Tianxing trusted and valued him. How could Nangong Buhua not be excited? Nangong Nihuang was also very smart. She understood Ji Tianxing's deep meaning, and her beautiful eyes couldn't help but light up. She looked at Ji Tianxing with eyes full of gratitude. Ji Tianxing did not say anything else. He opened the spatial door of the Divine Pagoda and pulled Nangong Ao out of the distorted spacetime. A few days had passed in the outside world and he had been recuperating in the distorted spacetime for half a year. Although his injuries were still serious, at least he was awake and could recuperate by himself. "I will leave Nangong Ao to you. Let him stay in Yenshu Grotto Heaven to recuperate. After this battle, I will reward him according to his merits." Ji Tianxing handed Nangong Ao to Nangong Buhua and was about to leave the Great Hall of Light. He had told them everything that needed to be told, and now he was going to the northwest to kill the patrol commander, Qian. Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang chased after him, wanting to send him out of Yenshu Grotto Heaven. But Ji Tianxing refused. "There is no need to send me out. It is not a good thing to attract attention. Take care of Nangong Ao first and remember to control the situation." After he finished speaking, he waved at Nangong Buhua and his daughter and flew up into the sky. Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang stood outside the palace gate, looking up at his figure. Nangong Ao, who was very weak, also wanted to walk over and send Ji Tianxing off with his eyes. But his injuries were too serious and he fell down before he could take 2 steps. Nangong Buhua hurriedly helped him up, asked about his injuries and sent someone to send him back to his residence. Next, Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang went to do their own tasks. Although they were worried about Ji Tianxing's safety, but they were not vague about what they should do. They also understood that only by controlling the situation and guarding Yenshu Grotto Heaven could they avoid Ji Tianxing's worries. Not long after, the leaders of the 8 forces also heard the news of Ji Tianxing's departure. Although they were mentally prepared, Ji Tianxing's eagerness to leave still surprised them. At the same time, they were also a little disappointed. After Ji Tianxing left Yanshu Grotto Heaven, he only told Nangong Buhua and his daughter some things and did not even greet them. It was clear who was more important and who was more trusted by Ji Tianxing. But they were not jealous and they knew that it was useless. They secretly made up their minds to make contributions and let Ji Tianxing see them in a new light. Chapter 4098. Whoosh. The Godslayer battleship streaked through the sky like an invisible black line, heading toward the northwest. Inside the battleship, White Dragon was piloting the ship. Ji Tianxing had already entered the distorted spacetime of the Jiutian 10 Absolutes Pagoda to cultivate. Sai Master was born to be busy. He's been constantly on the move all his life without a moment's rest. Seeing his master so busy, White Dragon sighed emotionally. But he also knew that from the moment his master began his revenge mission, he was destined to be on the move and kill. Only when the 5 god emperors were killed would his work end and he would be able to enjoy a long period of peace. He didn't feel tired, but he didn't want to see his master so tired. But he was too weak. Even though he had become a god king, he couldn't help his master much. Now that his master had given him the most important task of piloting the battleship, he could only do his best to fulfill his master's trust. Ji Tianxing was already a peak god king. But he discovered that his strength and cultivation base hadn't reached the limit. There was still room for improvement. As a peak god king, he was at least 10 times stronger than an ordinary peak god king. If he reached the limit, he would be many times stronger than a peak god king. Based on his past experience, he guessed that it would be 99 times. 99 times stronger than a peak god king? Is that still a god king? I'm probably a god emperor now, right? With this thought, Ji Tianxing decided to continue cultivating and increasing his strength so that he could reach the limit as soon as possible. In the battle to kill the Meng Shuai, he had obtained more than 50 quintessence fragments, but he hadn't had the time to refine them. Now that he was on the move, he could refine them and absorb more divine Dao laws while increasing his strength. Before he set off, he had already obtained the relevant information. 10 days ago, Qi Yan had led 2,000 soldiers to the rising waters in the northwest, capturing and killing the 8th elder of the Nangong clan. After that incident, Qi Yan and the 2,000 soldiers under his command temporarily stayed in the Water of Breath to rest and reorganize. Moreover, the imperial tutor and the Meng Shuai had given him instructions to carry out his mission there. However, Ji Tianxing's destination this time was not the rising water realm. He still had to continue heading north. This was because he had let Nangong Buhua personally take charge of the Nangong clan's intelligence network. At the same time, the rebel alliance's Shimi Grotto Heaven had one of the best intelligence networks in the Boundless Heaven continent. Through Shimi Paradise's investigation, he learned that Qi Yan had left the Water of Breath with his subordinates 2 days ago. 2 days ago, the news of Meng Shuai's assassination had just spread. Even though the Shimi Grotto Heaven's intelligence network couldn't find out why Qi Yan had left, or where he had gone. However, after Ji Tianxing received the news, he could roughly guess Qi Yan's movements after careful analysis. Firstly, the imperial tutor and the Meng Shuai had set up a trap in the Zhenwu domain to ambush Ji Tianxing. However, Meng Shuai was killed and Nangong Ao was rescued. Their plan was ruined. The imperial tutor would not continue to stay in the Zhenwu domain. He would definitely leave with his 3,000 soldiers. Therefore, Qi Yan would definitely not go to the Zhenwu domain. Secondly, the Shura God Emperor's base was in the Dark Night domain in the north. That was the Shura God Emperor's base camp. Usually, the imperial tutor, the Meng Shuai and Qi Yan would guard that place. Now that the Meng Shuai had been killed, the morale of the imperial tutor's troops was unstable. Out of consideration for stability, the imperial tutor would most likely lead his soldiers back to the Dark Night domain to make further plans. Therefore, Ji Tianxing speculated that Qi Yan and his 2,000 soldiers must be on their way to the Dark Night domain. From the Water of Breath to the Dark Night domain, they would have to cross 8 domains. If Qi Yan were to travel alone, he might be able to arrive in 8 days. However, he would be traveling with 2,000 soldiers on a divine warship, so he wouldn't be traveling too fast. Even if he flew at full speed, it would still take 10 to 11 days. In Ji Tianxing's mind, he had already deduced the route from the Water of Breath to the Dark Night domain. He knew exactly which domains were on this route and which important locations it would pass through. Now that 2 days had passed, he could roughly estimate Qi Yan's location. However, it would take at least a day for the White Dragon to reach that location on the divine warship. By then Qi Yan would be far away. Therefore, Ji Tianxing had to calculate the divine warship's route and where he would be able to intercept Qi Yan through complicated and meticulous calculations. To many godly kings, it was very difficult for them to guarantee the accuracy of this question given their knowledge. However, Ji Tianxing only needed 10 breaths of time to calculate the correct result. 2 days later, in the windswept empire's territory, the divine warship's route would cross with Qi Yan's. He could intercept and kill Qi Yan there. Of course, the premise was that Qi Yan was rushing back to the Dark Night domain as fast as he could. 2 days in the outside world was equivalent to 100 days in the distorted spacetime. Ji Tianxing had collected more than 50 quintessence fragments. Only 17 of them belonged to god kings, while the rest belonged to intermediate god kings. Refining these quintessence fragments should have been faster. However, the first to be refined was, of course, the Meng Shuai's quintessence fragment. After all, many of the imperial tutors and Meng Shuai's plans, actions, and secrets were hidden in the memories of the Meng Shuai's soul. Ji Tianxing spent a month carefully refining the Meng Shuai's memories. As expected, he had obtained countless secrets. Through the memories of the Meng Shuai's soul, he learned many of the Azura God Emperor's secrets. For example, in which year did God Emperor Xiao Luo lead his elite troops and which high-level divine kings left the divine world for the extraterrestrial starry skies? He also knew how many cultivation resources the boundless heaven continent collected every year and transported them to outer space once every 50 years. He also knew the rough route of the people responsible for transporting the resources. Another example was that of the current 18 ancient clans and 36 top forces. 6 of them pretended to be neutral on the surface, but they were secretly the Azura God Emperor's lackeys. There were also 3 superpowers that had been living in seclusion for more than 2,000 years. In fact, they had long since submitted to the Azura God Emperor. There were also many bits and pieces of information and secrets that ran through the timeline of more than 800 years. They clearly showed the Meng Shuai's experiences over the years. After refining the Meng Shuai's quintessence fragment, Ji Tianxing gained a deeper and more thorough understanding of the boundless heaven continent. The number of experts the Azura God Emperor had left on the boundless heaven continent, the distribution of their forces, and the battle plans of the imperial tutor and the Meng Shuai were all in Ji Tianxing's hands. To him, this was an immeasurably valuable gain. It was as valuable as a supreme-grade king-level divine artifact. At the very least, it would allow his rebel alliance to avoid detours and reduce casualties in their future operations against the imperial tutor. They could even gain insight into opportunities. Among the many secrets the Meng Shuai knew, there was one that was particularly important. That was, the Azura God Emperor knew that Kenshin had returned to the God realm and wanted to destroy his forces on the boundless heaven continent. However, the Azura God Emperor did not intend to pay attention to it. That was because the research in outer space had finally reached a critical juncture. Chapter 4099. Ji Tianxing had thought that he'd be able to learn more about the gray mist from the Meng Shuai's memories. He hadn't expected that even the Meng Shuai wouldn't know much about the Azura God Emperor's plans. After all, the Meng Shuai and the imperial tutor had been ordered to guard the boundless heaven continent and hadn't left the God realm for nearly 1,000 years. Somewhat disappointed, Ji Tianxing thought to himself, it seems that I'll have to go to the stars if I want to investigate the gray mist. The Azura God Emperor is extremely secretive about this matter. Even confidants like the imperial tutor and the Meng Shuai haven't divulged any useful information or secrets. After refining the Meng Shuai's quintessence fragment, Ji Tianxing moved on to the other God King's quintessence fragments. Before he knew it, 100 days had passed. In total, he'd refined 10 quintessence fragments and gained 100 new laws of the divine Tao. The Meng Shuai was the main reason he'd gained so many laws of the divine Tao. After all, the Meng Shuai was a bona fide peak God King who'd mastered nearly 900 laws of the divine Tao. After this round of cultivation, Ji Tianxing's mastery of the divine Tao had reached 1,300 laws of the divine Tao. He still didn't know how many laws of the divine Tao a God Emperor could master. However, he knew that within the God King realm, he was already unprecedented and would not be surpassed in the future. That evening, the White Dragon steered the Godslayer warship toward the predetermined location. Ji Tianxing had no choice but to call it a day after cultivating for 100 days in the distorted spacetime. He'd have to wait until he killed Qi Yan to refine the remaining 40 or so quintessence fragments. The setting sun was as red as blood. Outside Heaven's Bridge Pass, cold winds rustled. A dark green forest stretched in the distance, while withered yellow weeds swayed in the wind nearby. The Godslayer warship flew straight toward Heaven's Bridge Pass. According to Ji Tianxing's calculations, Qi Yan and his subordinates would pass by when he arrived at Heaven's Bridge Pass. After all, this was where Qi Yan had to pass on his way back to the Dark Night Domain. Heaven's Bridge Pass was a cliff between two mountain peaks that was more than 2,000 feet deep. Below the cliff was a 1,000-foot-wide river with endless water. The cliffs on both sides were straight and precipitous. The mountain peaks were more than 2,000 feet in height. Looking down at this cliff from high up in the sky, it looked as if it had been hacked by the heavens with a giant axe. That was why it had the name Heaven Chiming Pass. Below the cliff was filled with water vapor and clouds. The bridge pass Heaven's Bridge Pass was always shrouded in a hazy mist. After the god-slaying battleship arrived at the Heaven Harmony Pass, it stopped at a height of 40,000 feet and hid within the clouds. Ji Tianxing and White Dragon stood in the cockpit, looking around vigilantly. At the same time, to search to find traces, to find cheeses. Searched after searching, to search as to find, twos. After a while, Bai Long couldn't wait any longer. He asked, "Master, according to your calculations, Qi Yan will definitely pass by here if he wants to return to the Dark Night Domain. Even if your calculations are off, it shouldn't be more than 15 minutes, right?" With the King level's flying speed, 15 minutes would cover a distance of a few 100,000 miles. Ji Tianxing nodded and said, "Don't be anxious. Wait patiently." Bai Long nodded and said, "Master, since there's a 15 minutes difference, wouldn't we be waiting for nothing if Qi Yan has already passed by?" Ji Tianxing waved his hand and explained, "It's impossible for such a situation to occur. I calculated based on his fastest speed, so he will only be later and not earlier." Bai Long thought it made sense. His master calculated based on Qi Yan's fastest speed. That was the ideal situation. But in reality, Qi Yan might not be able to maintain his fastest speed with 2,000 soldiers. Therefore, as long as Qi Yan and his men passed by Heaven's Bridge Pass, they wouldn't miss it. Master and Bai Long stood in the cockpit and waited patiently. Time passed quietly. The setting sun slowly set in the sky and the sky gradually darkened. 15 minutes passed quickly. There was still no movement south of Heaven's Bridge Pass. Bai Long was a little anxious. He secretly frowned and thought, even if there is a mistake in Master's estimation, 15 minutes have already passed. He was worried that they would miss, but he couldn't remind Ji Tianxing. Moreover, as his disciple, he should have more confidence in his master. Just like that, the god-slaying battleship concealed its tracks and aura. The master and disciple continued to wait. The master and disciple's expressions and reactions were different. Ji Tianxing's expression was calm and his eyes were clear. He looked calm and composed as if he had a card up his sleeve. Bai Long, on the other hand, frowned and looked around. He was clearly worried and anxious. However, seeing his master's confidence and calmness, he calmed down a lot. Soon, another 15 minutes had passed. The setting sun had already set. The sky was getting darker and darker. Night gradually fell. Several times, White Dragon couldn't help but ask Ji Tianxing if they should search the south. Maybe Qi Yan and his men were on their way here. They could find them if they searched south. But that would make him look too impatient. Therefore, he could only put away his worries and anxiety and wait with his master. Finally, night fell. Heaven and earth returned to darkness. An hour had passed since Ji Tianxing's prediction, but Qi Yan still hadn't appeared. With the speed of the god-slaying battleship, Qi Yan and his men had already flown 5 million miles in an hour. No matter how one looked at it, the facts proved that Ji Tianxing's prediction was wrong. Bai Long was a little regretful. After hesitating for a while, he said, "Master, maybe Qi Yan is too cunning. He didn't pass by here. Why don't we rush to the Dark Night Domain to kill him?" Everyone knew that Qi Yan was going to return to his lair. It would be a sure thing to kill him in the Dark Night Domain. However, doing so would waste more time and there would be more dangers and uncertainties. Ji Tianxing raised his hand to stop Bai Long. He said calmly, "Don't worry. Wait a little longer. He should be here soon." In fact, Bai Long was certain that Qi Yan wouldn't be here. Seeing his master so persistent, he couldn't say anything. He could only wait patiently. Who knew that a miracle would happen after 100 breaths? South of Heaven Pass, in the night sky tens of thousands of miles away, two spots of light appeared. The two spots of light, one in front and one behind, streaked across the night sky like shooting stars. They flew toward Heaven Pass as fast as lightning. Bai Long's divine sense could only scan a radius of 10,000 miles. He could only see the light, but he couldn't see what was in the light. However, Ji Tianqing's divine sense had already seen it clearly. The two spots of light were two god-slaying battleships that were thousands of feet long. Although the god-slaying battleships didn't have anything special about them, and there were no emblems on their bodies. However, for two god-slaying battleships to pass by Heaven Pass at this time, there was no one else other than Qi Yan and his men. Chapter 4100. At first, White Dragon had been filled with disappointment and was about to give up. But he hadn't expected two warships to appear at this time. When he saw the two lights, his first reaction was that his master's prediction was correct. Qi Yan had indeed come. Even though he was an hour later than predicted, Qi Yan had still passed through Heaven's Chimney Pass. White Dragon finally understood why his master had been so calm until now. He'd been certain that Qi Yan would pass through here. A thought flashed through his mind. Could it be that after killing the Meng Shuai, Master refined the memories of the Meng Shuai's soul and learned of the Meng Shuai's battle plan? The Meng Shuai had already ordered Qi Yan to return to the Anya domain? That should be the case. Otherwise, Master wouldn't be so confident. Thinking of this, White Dragon asked, Master, did you refine the memories of the Meng Shuai's soul and learn of their plan? Was that why you were so certain that Qi Yan would pass through here? Ji Tianqing calmly gazed ahead and slowly raised his hands. As the two lights drew closer and closer, he quickly gathered his divine power and prepared to use his ultimate skill to intercept the two warships. His answer to White Dragon's question was simple. No. Since he hadn't foreseen this, there was only one answer. He had indeed predicted that Qi Yan would pass through Heaven's Chimney Pass. White Dragon understood this as well. It was a matter of probability. After news of the Meng Shuai's death spread, Qi Yan had only two choices. The first was to return to the Anya domain as quickly as possible and meet up with the imperial tutor. The second was to head elsewhere as quickly as possible to carry out new orders or missions. In short, Qi Yan couldn't stay in the waters of respiration and wait for Ji Tianqing to kill him. There was only a 50% chance that Qi Yan would pass through Heaven's Chimney Pass. However, Ji Tianqing had analyzed the situation and Qi Yan's and the imperial tutor's styles of conduct. He was certain that Qi Yan would choose the safer option, which was to return to the Anya domain. While these thoughts flashed through White Dragon's mind, the two lights had already arrived. It seemed that in another 2 to 3 breaths of time, the two battleships would cross the Sky Chimera Pass and fly towards the north. At this moment, Ji Tianqing finally made his move. Divine Clock, go! With a low shout, he suddenly exerted his strength and summoned the primordial chaos bell. A fist-sized divine clock flew out of the battleship and appeared high up in the sky, instantly expanding billions of times. Buzz. Following a muffled explosion, the primordial bell of primordial chaos expanded to a radius of 10,000 miles. It descended from the sky and covered the surroundings of Heaven Chiming Pass. The primordial chaos bell also enveloped the god-slaying battleship and the two black battleships. Under the control of Ji Tianqing, the divine bell once again released a majestic divine power, forming a light wall in the depths of the ground, completely sealing off the space within a radius of 10,000 miles. As a result, the two battleships were unable to escape even if they had wings. The world was already pitch black, so the primordial chaos bell that spanned thousands of miles didn't seem to have any effect on them. The 2,000 experts in the two warships did not notice anything amiss. Only the few god generals piloting the battleships realized that the divine clock had descended from the sky and covered all the light. The few god generals panicked and hurriedly controlled the arrays of the battleships to stop the battleships. In this way, the tragedy of the battleships crashing into the divine clock was avoided. The two battleships stopped in the night sky. The few god generals sounded the alarm and immediately woke up the experts in the battleships. There were more than 1,000 soldiers in each battleship. They were all in their rooms circulating their energy or resting with their eyes closed. Suddenly they heard the urgent alarm. Everyone rushed out of their rooms and gathered in the battleships. These soldiers were all well-trained and reacted quickly. In just 10 breaths, all 2,000 of them had gathered. Zhoosh. Not only that, the few god generals piloting the battleships also opened the defensive arrays of the battleships. More than 200 cannons popped out and looked around cautiously. Once enemies appeared, they would open fire without hesitation. In fact, Ji Tianqing's speculation was right. The 2,000 well-trained soldiers in the two battleships were Qi Yan's subordinates. At this moment, Qi Yan was sitting in the main hull of the first battleship. He looked dignified as he issued a series of orders. He also spread out his divine consciousness to check the situation outside. Originally, he was a 9th-level Divine King Realm expert. His divine consciousness could cover a radius of 90,000 miles. However, his divine consciousness was blocked by the primordial chaos spell when it reached 10,000 miles. He could not extend it no matter how hard he tried. Qi Yan immediately realized that the divine artifact that sealed them was of a very high grade and powerful divine artifact. Then his divine sense probed into the ground and came into contact with the underground light wall. The light wall was very powerful. Not only could it block his divine consciousness, but it also gave him great pressure. Qi Yan had a few upper king grade divine artifacts. He was well aware of the power of upper king grade divine artifacts. Therefore, he immediately determined that the divine clock that sealed them was most likely a superior king grade divine artifact. Based on Qi Yan's experience, even a peak divine king might not have a superior king grade divine artifact. Originally, when he knew that the Meng Shuai was intercepted by Kenshin, he was deeply afraid and fearful. On the way back to the Anya region, he was constantly on tenterhooks, guarding against Kenshin coming to kill him. The heavenly generals under his command kept persuading him that Kenshin had returned to Yenshu's grotto heaven and would not come to kill him. No matter how much the people analyzed and spoke with certainty, he did not let down his guard and worry. Even though he did not want to lose his dignity in front of his subordinates and appear to be timid and weak. However, he knew that Kenshin could not be judged by common sense. He was best at creating miracles and creating the unthinkable. Just like how Kenshin intercepted and killed the Meng Shuai. That was also impossible in the eyes of ordinary people. However, Kenshin still managed to do it. Just like now, the soldiers thought that Kenshin would not come to kill him. However, who could be sure? Who could guarantee? At least Qi Yan thought that there was a 50% chance that Kenshin would come to kill him. Reality proved that Qi Yan was right. However, he was not happy at all. Instead, his mood became heavier and his expression turned uglier. Kenshin, it must be you. Qi Yan looked sharply at the night sky outside the warship and roared silently in his heart. Only you have the guts and strength to ambush me at Tianqiang Pass. Only you can take out a superior king-grade divine artifact so casually. It seemed to be to verify his guess. Not far away, Ji Tianqing put away the deity-slaying warship that had been in an invisible state and had concealed its aura. Swoosh. He appeared alone in the night sky and stood proudly. His expression was indifferent. With his hands behind his back, he quietly looked at the two divine warships. His cold and sharp gaze seemed to be able to see through the cover of the warship and was directed at Qi Yan in the crowd. Even though he did not speak, there was an invisible murderous aura and power that spread between heaven and earth. Chapter 4101. When Ji Tianqing put away the god-slaying battleship and removed his disguise and invisibility, he appeared in the night sky. The 2,000 soldiers in the two divine warships all noticed him. Everyone's divine consciousness was focused on him. Everyone was sizing him up. When they saw his face clearly, their expressions changed drastically. They were filled with shock and fear. It's Kenshin. Oh my god, it's Kenshin. No wonder he dared to ambush us alone. He's Kenshin. This is impossible. Didn't he return to the Yenshu cave? How could he be here? It's over. It's all over now. We're all dead. There was no doubt that although the 2,000 soldiers had not seen Kenshin with their own eyes, they knew what Kenshin looked like. After all, a month or two ago the Imperial Preceptor and Meng Shuai had given the order to send the appearance of the Sword God to all the soldiers under their command. To the soldiers under the Imperial Tutor and the Meng Shuai, Kenshin was their ultimate target. How could they not recognize him? Before this, except for Qi Yan, no one would have thought that Kenshin would ambush them here. However, when it really happened, everyone was terrified and felt a deep sense of despair. Even if they had an absolute advantage in numbers, 2,000 against 1 Kenshin. Even if they had 40 divine kings and 2,000 Sir Gods. Facing Kenshin alone, they still felt a chill down their spines. They were in extreme despair. This was Kenshin's reputation. A powerhouse who was trusted and relied on by his teammates and feared by his opponents. Just think about it, the Meng Shuai was so powerful that he led 2,400 soldiers. Weren't they all killed by the sword god? Not a single one was left alive. Their 2,000 men were no match for the Meng Shuai. Was there any suspense in the outcome? Of course not. While the 2,000 soldiers were filled with fear and despair, their morale had also fallen to the bottom, and their morale was at an all-time low. If it weren't for Qi Yan and the other divine generals, these soldiers would have been defeated long ago. Fortunately, Qi Yan was calm and collected. When he saw that all the officers and soldiers had ashen faces, he shouted coldly, "What are you panicking for? No matter how strong Kenshin was, he was only one person. He's just a peak divine king after all and not the invincible god emperor. What's there to be afraid of?" Qi Yan's deep, dignified voice reverberated throughout the warship. At the same time it was transmitted to another warship. The 2,000 soldiers who were slightly panicked and frightened quieted down a lot, but the fear in their hearts did not decrease. After all, Qi Yan's words didn't have much effect and couldn't change the outcome. Qi Yan continued, "I know you're afraid of the sword god's reputation. But could fear solve the problem? Would he be spared from death just because he was afraid of him? He's already used a supreme-grade king-grade divine clock to seal off an area of 10,000 miles. We have no way out. Even if it's me, it's impossible to escape." Hearing his words, the 2,000 soldiers became even more panicked. Many of their expressions and eyes were filled with fear and despair. They had no morale left at all. If it weren't for military rules and discipline, they would have already scattered and fled for their lives. However, they didn't do so. First, they were restricted by military rules. Second, they knew they couldn't escape. Even their commander, Qi Yan, admitted that they couldn't escape. How could they survive? The only thing they could do now was to stick together and listen to their commander's orders. Only then would they have a slim chance of survival. Seeing the soldiers gradually calm down, Qi Yan felt slightly comforted. He said earnestly, "I believe everyone understands that we're in a desperate situation. Since we can't escape or hide, fear won't solve the problem. Then we can only fight with our backs to the river and fight to the death. Yes, we're not as strong as Kenshin. 2,000 soldiers are just cannon fodder in front of him. However, we have to work together and treat this battle as the last fight of our lives. Even if we die in battle, we have to die with honor, brilliance, and value. Even if I die here with you, we have to drag the Kenshin down with us. If we can die together, then we'll be the greatest heroes and our names will go down in history." Qi Yan's words ignited the flames of hope in the 2,000 soldiers. Everyone's dim eyes regained their luster. Everyone was convinced by what he said, and all of them were determined to fight to the death, ready to fight one last time. Even if they died in battle, they had to bite off a piece of the Kenshin's flesh. If they could die together with the Kenshin, it would be worth it even if they died. Their names would definitely spread throughout the world and bring honor to their ancestors. As a result, the soldiers who had been listless and demoralized a moment ago became energetic and high-spirited again. If one observed carefully, they would realize that it wasn't the high morale of being invincible and full of confidence. Instead, it was the determination and heroism of being willing to die for justice. Qi Yan saw this and was very gratified. He quickly ordered, "All soldiers listen to my orders. Other than the soldiers guarding the warships, everyone else will follow me and form the 6 directions battle formation. Surround the Kenshin and fight to the death with him. Soldiers operating the warships must go all out and look for any opportunity to bombard the Kenshin." After giving the order, he led 10 of his personal guards and flew out of the warships first. Then more than 1,900 soldiers flew out of the warships one after another and formed a battle formation in the night sky. The 80 soldiers guarding the warships immediately controlled the 2 warships and adjusted their direction to attack Ji Tianxing from the left and right. However, Ji Tianxing wouldn't give them a chance and wouldn't waste too much time making them form a battle formation. He didn't greet them and didn't waste any time. He attacked directly. Rain of swords. In order to end the battle as quickly as possible, he used a large-scale destructive skill right from the start. He used all of his power and pointed his swords at the sky. His entire body released an invisible aura. At this moment, it was as if the heavens and earth were under his control. Even the thousands of stars in the outer space were under his control. Suddenly, Countless stars appeared in the sky and poured down like a meteor shower. However, the night sky was blocked by the primordial chaos bell, so no one could see it. Qi Yan and his soldiers only saw Ji Tianqing raise his hand to cast a spell, but they didn't know what was going on. Of course, they didn't care about this detail. They were busy forming a battle formation. After 2 breaths, as many as 90,000 starry swords fell from the sky and approached Heaven's Pass. At this moment, Ji Tianqing immediately put away the primordial chaos bell to prevent it from blocking the 10,000 starry swords. The divine bell that had been suppressing everyone disappeared. Tens of thousands of miles of heaven and earth were illuminated by the starry swords. The 2,000 soldiers couldn't get used to the sudden brightness. They couldn't open their eyes because of the brightness. Everyone was stunned for a moment and subconsciously looked up at the sky. When they saw the densely packed starry swords, everyone widened their eyes in horror and roared in horror. Chapter 4102. It was a pity. The 2,000 soldiers had yet to get into formation. When they saw the starry swords clearly, the rain of swords was only 100 miles away from them. Even though Ji Tianqing had removed the primordial chaos bell and released the seal on the 2,000 soldiers, it was too late for them to escape. At this critical moment, only Qi Yan 40 god kings, and some god lords instinctively released their divine power and formed a defensive shield. Then 90,000 starry swords covered an area of 10,000 miles and drowned Heaven Chong Pass in the 2,000 soldiers. Bang bang bang. Boom 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 boom. Sword light splashed everywhere and a deafening explosion resounded through the sky. The lofty and dangerous Heaven Chong Pass was instantly reduced to ruins by the 10,000 starry swords. Whether it was the mountain, the deep valleys, or the flowing rivers, they were all flattened by the starry swords. Dust was flying everywhere and billions of starry swords were flying everywhere. Countless soldiers were screaming and wailing as they were on the verge of death. At this moment, everyone finally realized how powerful Kenshin was. Every starry sword that was 10,000 feet long had the power to destroy heaven and earth. It was enough to kill a lower god king instantly. 9 starry swords came down like dense raindrops and their power was indescribably terrifying. Under the attack of the starry swords, the defensive shield that the soldiers had formed with all their might was as fragile as paper. The muffled and explosive sounds were the sound of the shields being broken. Most of the starry swords that flew everywhere were the fragments of the shields after they were broken. In just one breath, over 1,000 god lords were killed by the starry swords. They died without a complete corpse. More than 10 unlucky god kings were also killed by the starry swords. Not even their bones were left. Hundreds of god lords were lucky enough to survive, but they were severely injured and unable to fight anymore. Only Qi Yan and a few upper god kings were protected by king-grade high-grade divine artifacts and barely managed to block the attack of the 10,000 starry swords. They were not injured. The rest of the people were either lightly or heavily injured. Even the 2 warships that were glittering and ready to fire at Ji Tianqing were blown into smithereens by the giant swords and scattered in the ruins. The morale that the soldiers had accumulated with great difficulty was immediately extinguished by the rain of swords. The surviving soldiers looked at the wreckage around them and the tragic scene of flesh and blood flying in the air. They were all horrified and frightened. They no longer had the slightest bit of fighting spirit, and their minds were in a mess as they fled in all directions with all their might. However, the effect and power of the rain of swords was far more than just a single attack. After falling to the ground, tens of thousands of starry swords were shattered. However, there were still 80,000 starry swords flying back and forth in the sky, forming a huge sword net. Swish, swish. The sword light shuttled back and forth, and everything within a radius of 10,000 miles was a world of starlight. This terrifying sword net was like a ball of starlight with a radius of 10,000 miles. It illuminated the surrounding 10,000 miles, and it was as bright as the moon. However, its lethality and the terrifying consequences it caused were completely different from that of the moon. The hundreds of injured monarch god experts were instantly sliced into pieces, turning into a rain of blood that filled the sky. Even many mid-level divine kings couldn't withstand the attack of the giant swords. They couldn't last more than 3 breaths before they were cut into pieces. After a long time, the power of the 80,000 starry swords was used up and gradually dissipated. The world returned to peace and the ruins returned to darkness. Only the rain of blood was still falling and the ruins were dyed red. The world was silent. The 20 or so survivors were dumbfounded. Qian was also stunned. 2,000 divine monarchs and a dozen low-level and mid-level divine kings were all dead. Only Qian, 8 high-level divine kings and 14 mid-level divine kings survived by luck. Moreover, only Qian was lightly injured. The others were all heavily injured and they looked very pathetic and miserable. In the rain of blood, Ji Tianxing was still standing in the night sky with his hands behind his back. He didn't take out any weapons. He quietly looked at Qian and the others. He didn't say anything and just slowly walked over. Instantly, Qian and the others trembled in fear and instinctively stepped back. A few mid-level divine kings who were severely injured were so scared that their teeth chattered. Before this, Qian and the other divine kings couldn't understand. Did Kenshin really kill the Meng Shuai and his 2,400 soldiers by himself? It was too unbelievable. Kenshin must have a large number of divine kings helping him. Otherwise he couldn't have done it. Now they finally knew the answer. That's right, Kenshin killed the Meng Shuai and his subordinates by himself. As for how Kenshin did it, they had already seen it with their own eyes. Kenshin, you win. Seeing Ji Tianxing approach step by step, Qian's heart was dead. He was full of despair and he sighed with a dejected expression. More than 20 elders also endured their injuries and stared vigilantly at Ji Tianxing. They slowly stepped back. Ji Tianxing continued to approach. He looked straight at Qian and asked, Qian, do you know why I am here to kill you? Haha. Qian sneered and said, as everyone knows, you sent Nangong Ao and Nangong Qing to lead the Nangong clan's intelligence network to investigate our generals. You're making a death list. As the Inspector Commander, I am one of the top experts in the Boundless Heaven continent. Of course, I am on your death list. From the moment you killed Jin Shuang, I knew that you would come to kill me sooner or later. Ji Tianxing frowned and said coldly, that's only part of the reason. I can wait and kill you when the time comes. But I didn't. I calculated the path you would take to return to the Dark Night domain and killed you here. Think carefully, what other reason could there be? Qian also frowned and asked doubtfully, isn't this reason enough? Other than this reason, I have no enmity with you. I didn't attack you back then. Seeing that he couldn't think of a second reason, Ji Tianxing's eyes became even colder. He answered directly, the second reason is that I want to kill you to avenge the 8th elder Nangong Qing. Qian was even more confused. He said with a startled face, you want to avenge Nangong Qing? But as far as I know, you have no relationship with Nangong Qing. You are such a cold-blooded and heartless person, Kenshin. How can you avenge a stranger? You saved Nangong Ao first and then avenged Nangong Qing. In fact, it was just an act for the Nangong clan and other forces to see, right? You have to let everyone think that you, Kenshin, sympathize with your subordinates and are very loyal. Only then can you buy people's hearts. I didn't expect that the high and mighty Kenshin would play such a childish trick. Knowing that he was going to die, Qian was no longer afraid and mocked Ji Tianxing with disdain. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 4103. The 20 God Kings nodded in agreement with Qian's analysis. Everyone felt that it was reasonable. They were very disdainful and contemptuous of Ji Tianxing, and they all started to mock him. They probably knew that they were going to die, so they felt a sense of relief. They were not afraid at all, so they were very indulgent. Being able to laugh at the sword god once before he died was probably a form of consolation. Ji Tianxing could understand their feelings. He knew that this was their last release before they died, so he was not angry. He looked at Qian and the others indifferently and said calmly, you sinister, despicable and inhumane people are used to seeing other people's lives as nothing. Therefore your way of thinking and thinking only cares about benefits. It's normal for you to think this way and I don't bother to explain. After all, your lives have come to an end. I won't see you again. After saying the last 3 words, he took out the sword of burial of heaven and prepared to send Qian and the others on their way. Qian also gripped his 2 swords tightly and stared at Ji Tianxing with murderous intent. He roared, soldiers, although we are not Kenshin's match, we would rather die standing than live kneeling. Even if we bleed to the last drop of our blood, we will never surrender. Charge with me, kill. After roaring, Qian waved his 2 swords and his entire body exploded with killing intent. The 20 God Kings were affected by his solemn and stirring aura. Even though they were heavily injured, They threw aside their lives and waved their divine weapons recklessly, shouting as they charged toward Ji Tianxing. However, an extremely ironic scene occurred. More than 20 god kings charged at Ji Tianxing without any regard for their own safety. They solemnly and resolutely charged at Ji Tianxing. Qi Yan, who was shouting the battle cry, stayed where he was and did not move. When everyone charged toward Ji Tianxing and both sides were about to clash, he quickly retreated and teleported away. That's right. He urged the injured god kings to charge toward Ji Tianxing, hoping that they could hold Ji Tianxing back. As for himself, he had already made up his mind to take the opportunity to escape. Previously, the primordial chaos spell had sealed off a radius of 5,000 miles. He could not escape even if he wanted to. However, it was different now. Ji Tianxing had already put away the divine clock. There were no seals or restrictions around them. If he didn't escape now, when would he? You are indeed sinister and shameless. Ji Tianxing's divine sense had been locked onto Qi Yan the entire time. In fact, he had already guessed that Qi Yan was going to take the opportunity to flee when he heard Qi Yan's solemn, stirring, and heroic roar. The corners of his mouth curled into a contemptuous sneer. He threw out the sword of Burial of Heaven with his right hand and thrust it at Qi Yan. Burial of Heaven had also locked onto Qi Yan's divine soul aura. Like a meteor streaking across the night sky, it chased after Qi Yan. No matter how far Qi Yan ran, he would never be able to shake it off. At the same time, Ji Tianxing took out his divine hammer and swung it at the 20 over divine kings. Kill. I would rather die in battle than surrender. The divine kings roared as they waved their divine weapons and unleashed all kinds of divine abilities. Divine techniques covered the sky and poured down like a torrential flood. They were about to drown Ji Tianxing's figure. However, Ji Tianxing swung his divine hammer and smashed everyone's divine abilities to pieces. Immediately after, he swung his palm and sent out a few sword lights into the crowd. Bam, 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 bam. One divine king after another was cleaved in half by the sword lights. Ji Tianxing was like a torrent of steel. He was unstoppable as he rampaged through the crowd. Wherever he swept past, the god kings would be smashed to pieces and their flesh and blood would splatter everywhere. Whether it was the divine hammer's attack, the fists, or the sword lights, they all had the power to destroy heaven and earth. Those divine kings were completely unable to block them. In just 3 short breaths, 80% of the 20 over divine kings were killed. Their divine bodies were smashed into smithereens. Their divine cores also exploded into countless fragments and scattered in the ruins. The few remaining divine kings were scared out of their wits. They hurriedly retreated. One of them was so bloodshot that he actually wanted to self-detonate. He roared hysterically. Kenshin, let's die together. Wait. However, he was pulled back by his comrade just as he was about to self-detonate. It was a white-haired high-level divine king. He was covered in blood and looked miserable. He pointed at the empty night sky behind him and roared furiously. The commander ran away. That bastard Qi Yan told us to charge, but he took the opportunity to escape. The other divine kings finally reacted. They hurriedly looked at the night sky behind them and searched for Qi Yan's figure. Naturally, they couldn't find anything. At this time, Qi Yan had already escaped tens of thousands of kilometers away. Everyone had been deceived by Qi Yan and treated as cannon fodder. They were all filled with grief and despair. Thus, the white-haired divine king took the lead to surrender to Ji Tianxing. He shouted with grief and indignation, Kenshin. Qi Yan is a treacherous, shameless villain. We are ashamed to be associated with him. Tonight we have seen Kenshin for the first time. We deeply admire Kenshin's loyalty. Thus we admit defeat. We only ask that Kenshin spare our lives and give us a chance to turn over a new leaf. Even if we have to be your slaves, we are willing to be your lackeys. The old man's words were righteous, impassioned, and sincere as if they came from the bottom of his heart. The other divine kings were all stunned. They stared at the white-haired divine king, thinking to themselves, when did old Du become so quick-witted? What a beautiful statement. Thus, the divine kings came back to their senses and repeated the white-haired divine king's words. They looked as if they were sincerely remorseful. Ji Tianxing couldn't be bothered to look at them. He said expressionlessly, surrendering is useless. I don't need captives. With that he waved his hand and sent out sword light and fist shadows. He swung his divine hammer at everyone. Kenshin, you bastard! Kenshin, you are so vicious! The divine kings were filled with fear. They roared angrily and ran for their lives. But it was all for naught. After a series of muffled bangs, the divine kings were all killed. Shards of their godheads were scattered all over the place. Ji Tianqing didn't waste time picking up the spoils. His figure flickered and disappeared. The next moment he teleported thousands of miles away. He tore through the night sky as fast as lightning and chased after Qi Yan. At this moment the sword of burial of heaven was chasing after Qi Yan. It had already flown 200,000 miles. Qi Yan saw that Ji Tianqing wasn't chasing after him. Only a divine sword was chasing after him. He was both shocked and furious. Damn it! Even Kenshin's sword is so heaven-defying? It can even take the initiative to chase after me? He wasn't convinced. He wanted to stop and fight to destroy the sword of burial of heaven. But he had also heard of the legend of the sword of burial of heaven. He knew that it was a divine sword with spirituality and consciousness. Most importantly, Kenshin could catch up to him at any time. Thus he dismissed this thought and continued to teleport and flee. But unfortunately, no matter how fast he was, he couldn't be compared to Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing looked very relaxed. It was as if he was taking a stroll in the night sky. But with every step he took, he could teleport thousands of miles away. He took 40 consecutive steps and teleported 400,000 miles. His expression didn't change. Finally, when he was 450,000 miles away, he caught up with Qi Yan. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 4104. The Sword of Burial of Heaven was Ji Tianqing's natal divine weapon, so they were connected. As long as the Sword of Burial of Heaven followed Qi Yan, Ji Tianqing would be able to find him no matter how far he ran. After Ji Tianqing caught up to Qi Yan, he immediately swung his sword and sent out a few sword lights. He also raised his divine hammer and smashed it at Qi Yan. Qi Yan was already injured and he was exhausted from running. His divine power was weak. Seeing the dazzling sword lights and the mountain-sized hammer coming at him, he was terrified. He could only stop running and block with all his might. He knew how powerful the sword lights and hammer shadows were, so he didn't dare to hold back. He had to use all his divine weapons and defensive items to unleash all his potential. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. He held his sword with both hands and swung it. The sword lights formed a wall. Another 4 divine artifacts circled around him, circling and dancing, forming a thick divine light shield. He was burning with 5 colored flames. He used all his divine power and his robe fluttered. In the next moment, several sword lights that could split heaven and earth struck Qi Yan hard. Kaboom! With an earth-shattering sound, the light shield formed by Qi Yan's 2 swords was shattered. Immediately afterward, there was a series of muffled bang 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 sounds. The defensive light shield formed by the divine weapons around Qi Yan was also shattered by the sword lights. At this point, Qi Yan's double defense had been destroyed, and Ji Tianqing's sword lights had also collapsed. But the mountain-sized hammer shadow came at him. Qi Yan couldn't block it anymore. He could only burn his divine power and divine blood, turning them into bloody flames and using the last of his strength to protect himself. This was a forbidden divine power. Once it was used, it would consume thousands of years of divine power. It couldn't be recovered and it would cause permanent damage to the body. Qi Yan wouldn't use this move unless he had no other choice. At this moment he had turned into a giant bloody fireball. The surging blood-red flames enveloped him so tightly that his figure could barely be seen. Unfortunately, even this couldn't save his life. Boom! The mountain-sized shadow of the divine hammer smashed down and engulfed his figure. The blood-red fireball was smashed into smithereens on the spot, and countless blood-red fragments burst out. Qi Yan's body was also destroyed, turning into fragments that flew everywhere. Even though his divine body had been destroyed, his godhead had survived by a fluke. He had only suffered heavy injuries and was currently fleeing for his life. Even if he knew that he would not be able to escape from Ji Tianqing's pursuit and that he would die without a doubt. However, it was impossible for him to sit and wait for death, and he would never give up the slightest hope of survival. Shwa! With a flash of white light, Ji Tianqing teleported in the night sky. He crossed 20,000 miles in 2 steps and caught up with Qi Yan's godhead. Once again he swung his sword and slashed out 4 sword rays, which shrouded Qi Yan's godhead and prevented him from escaping. This time Qi Yan would not be able to escape. Boom! Amidst a muffled sound, Qi Yan's godhead was shattered by the sword light, turning into a dozen pieces that drifted down into the night sky. A 9th stage realm divine king expert, Boundless Heaven Continent's patrol commander, had fallen just like that. When the divine light scattered, heaven and earth returned to darkness. Ji Tianxing also picked up Qi Yan's godhead fragments and flew away. Very soon he returned to the previous battlefield and began to clean up the battlefield and collect the spoils of war. The battlefield with a radius of 10,000 miles had long turned into a mess of ruins. There were pits and cracks everywhere and the air was still filled with the smell of blood. 2,000 soldiers' broken corpses, weapons and armor fragments, as well as the wreckage of the 2 warships, were scattered in the ruins. Ji Tianxing's divine sense covered a radius of 10,000 miles and accurately collected close to 2,000 interspatial rings, as well as 40 pieces of the divine king expert's godhead fragments. As for everyone's armors and weapons, most of them had been shattered by the sword rain, so there was no need for them. After collecting the spoils of war, Ji Tianxing struck out a powerful force of earth with his palm, reversing the ground within a radius of 10,000 miles. Rumble. After a series of muffled noises, the ground returned to its original level. The traces of the battle, fragments and wreckage were all buried in the depths of the ground. Ji Tianxing then took out the god-slaying warship and let Bai Long drive the warship away. After returning to the warship, Ji Tianxing did not meditate. After all, he was not injured in the battle, nor did he consume too much divine power. He was still in good condition. Bai Long activated the formation of the warship, but did not know where to go. He asked, "Pastor, where are we going next? Back to Yanxu's paradise?" Ji Tianxing waved his hand and said, "We don't have to go back to Yanxu's paradise. Fly south first and I'll ask Nangong Buhua." Bai Long acknowledged his master's order and drove the warship to the south. He knew that his master did not want to return to Yanxu's paradise. It was a waste of time. His master wanted to ask Nangong Buhua if all the disciples of the 8 forces had arrived. After all, half a month's time was almost up. If all the 8 forces had arrived, his master would definitely proceed with the next step. As expected, Ji Tianxing took out the communication jade slip and asked Nangong Buhua about the situation. He also explained that he had killed Qi Yan. After Nangong Buhua received the message, he was naturally surprised and shocked. He was surprised by Ji Tianxing's strategy and efficiency. Then he replied to Ji Tianxing, saying that all the disciples of the 8 forces had arrived today. Just as Ji Tianxing had stipulated, each force had sent 1,000 people. Among them there were 20 divine kings and 200 upper divine lords. The other 700+ disciples were all middle and lower divine lords. There was no other way. Only those who were above the divine lord realm were qualified to participate in the war at the pinnacle of the boundless heaven continent. Those divine spirits in the heavenly god realm were not even qualified to be cannon fodder. After all, a war of this level was already worthy of being called a war of the gods. A few forces followed Ji Tianxing's rules. However, there were 2 forces that surprised Ji Tianxing. One was the War Gods clan. They had sent 1,200 people. Among them were 30 divine kings and 300 upper divine lords. The other was the Phoenix clan of the divine Phoenix Grotto Heaven. They had sent 1,300 disciples. Among them were 32 divine kings and 350 upper divine lords. This undoubtedly showed that these 2 ancient clans trusted and supported Ji Tianxing more. It was also obvious that they were not afraid of sacrificing themselves. They wanted to make a name for themselves in this war. This was because when the alliance was formed, Ji Tianxing had said that when they achieved hegemony in the future, they would be rewarded according to their contributions. No one knew how Ji Tianxing would reward them. However, they all believed that Ji Tianxing would not be stingy. There would definitely be substantial benefits. It would definitely not be just verbal praise or some insignificant glory. Even if Ji Tianxing did not reward them with substantial benefits, they would still gain Ji Tianxing's trust, regard, and friendship. There was no need to mention the benefits of becoming friends with Kenshin. Chapter 4105. The disciples of the Nangong clan had already gathered and were on standby. Since the disciples of the 8 powerhouses were all present, there was nothing more to be said. Ji Tianxing's next step of the plan could begin. Hence, after Ji Tianxing received Nangong Buhua's report, he immediately sent out a message and gave out an order. Order: Deputy Alliance Leader Nangong Buhua to lead the Lan clan, War God clan, Xia clan, Shimi Cave and Jiang clan to battle immediately. With Yanshu Cave as the boundary, sweep across the regions to the south and eliminate the targets on the death list. Also, make the lords of the regions submit and swear to surrender. Those who do not surrender will be killed without mercy. The first message was sent to Nangong Buhua and also to the 5 ancient clans. The content was clear and the mission was simple too. At the end of the message there was an oath of surrender. It was still 1,000 words long and was an improved version of the Heaven Dao Oath. Ji Tianxing asked Nangong Buhua to lead the 5 ancient clans to the south of Yanshu Cave to eliminate the experts and powerhouses on the death list and force the lords of the regions to surrender. When the alliance was first formed, Nangong Buhua had asked Ji Tianxing if he wanted to kill the lords of the regions. Ji Tianxing had said that if the lords of the regions were sensible, he could spare their lives. After all, his goal was to conquer the entire boundless heaven continent and subdue all the lords of the regions, not to kill all of them. After giving the order to Nangong Buhua, Ji Tianxing took out a communication jade slip and sent a message to the leaders of the Feng clan, 100 Smelting Ancient Sect and Yuchi clan. Set off immediately and sweep across the regions to the north of Yanshu Cave. Eliminate the targets on the death list and make the lords of the regions submit and swear to surrender. Those who do not surrender will be killed without mercy. The message was sent to the 2 ancient clans and 100 Smelting Ancient Sect. After the 2 clan leaders and Su Balian received the order, they did not dare to slack off. From everyone's point of view, the regions to the south of Yanshu Cave did not have any important figures or peak divine kings guarding them. Asking Nangong Buhua to lead the 5 forces to sweep the area seemed like a waste of talent. The area to the north of Yanshu's grotto heaven was even wider. There were many strong cultivators, and the imperial tutor was in charge of the Dark Night region. That was the lair of the Azura God Emperor. In the end, only the Phoenix clan, the 100 Refinements Ancient Sect and the Yuchi clan went. No matter how he looked at it, it seemed like he was overestimating himself and was courting death. However, after Ji Tianxing's order was relayed back to Yanshu's cave, all the forces accepted the order gladly and began to act immediately. No one felt that it was inappropriate, and no one objected to Ji Tianxing's decision. Firstly, the mission given by the Nangong clan and the other 5 forces was very easy, so they naturally wouldn't resist. As for the Phoenix clan, 100 Refinements Ancient Sect and Yuchi clan, they felt that this task was extremely difficult and heavy, but they did not object. Because the person who led them on this mission was Ji Tianxing. In the eyes of Nangong Buhua and the 8 forces, Ji Tianxing was a peerless expert who could fight against millions of division masters. As long as he was around, the imperial tutor, strong cultivators were nothing to fear. When the Phoenix clan, Yuchi clan and 100 Refinements Ancient Sect left Yanshu's grotto heaven, they unanimously decided to make Qingfeng region their first target after a short discussion. Qingfeng region was located in the north of Yanshu's grotto heaven, so it was the closest. Ever since the Kenshin established the Rebel Alliance, all kinds of news were flying around. The entire boundless heaven continent was abuzz with discussions. All the region masters were restless and everyone was anxious. Only Qingfeng region was peaceful. There were no drastic actions and there were no movements of people or troops. It was even difficult to guess what the region master of Qingfeng region was thinking based on the movements of Qingfeng region. Was he loyal to the Azura God Emperor, or was he leaning towards the Kenshin? No one knew. Therefore, the 3 forces made Qingfeng region their first target. They wanted to get off to a good start and hope for good luck. At least the region master of Qingfeng region was not a loyal supporter of the Azura God Emperor, so he might not resist much. When the 3,000 disciples of the Phoenix clan, Yuchi clan and 100 Refinements Ancient Sect rushed to Qingfeng region, they also sent a message to Ji Tianxing to report the situation. After Ji Tianxing received the news, he immediately sent a message to the Divine Phoenix clan leader. I will be waiting for you at Changshan region in 6 days. After sending the message, Ji Tianxing said to the White Dragon, speed up and head south to Jiohe region. The White Dragon did not have any questions. He immediately steered the god-slaying battleship to speed up to the target. However, no one knew that Ji Tianqing would make such a decision. The three forces were going to attack Qingfeng region. He had agreed to meet them at Changshan region in 6 days. However, he asked the White Dragon to steer the god-slaying battleship to Jiuhe region. What did this mean? It meant that he had already guessed the result. It would not be difficult for the three forces to subdue the region master of Qingfeng region. Therefore, he had to subdue the region master of Jiuhe region alone in 6 days. He also had to rush to Changshan region. He was saving time by splitting up with the three forces and advancing side by side. If the three forces were to find out about this, who knew what their reactions would be? 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. The Phoenix clan, Yuchi clan and 100 Refinements ancient sect each set up a battleship and entered the central region of Qingfeng region. These 3 battleships were all king grade upper grade, and they were equipped with many defensive and offensive formations. They were the fruits of the efforts of the three forces. Along the way they did not encounter any danger or ambush. It was a peaceful journey. However, when they entered the central region of Qingfeng region and approached the Qingfeng region master's cave residence, they slowed down and concealed their tracks and auras. At first, the Divine Phoenix clan leader suggested that they attack the Qingfeng region master's cave residence openly to show the power of the rebel alliance. However, the Yuchi clan and 100 Refinements ancient sect strongly disagreed. They thought that it was too risky. If they were ambushed and attacked by the Qingfeng region master in advance, they would suffer great losses. It would be too embarrassing. This was their first operation. They would rather not be dazzling than make a fool of themselves. Therefore, the 3 battleships chose to hide their auras and keep a low profile. Finally, in the afternoon, the 3 battleships arrived outside the Qingfeng region master's cave residence. They observed for a while and confirmed that the defense of the cave residence was not strong, so they decided to launch a surprise attack. After a round of fighting, more than 30 guards were killed and more than 60 were injured. The remaining 100 or so guards covered the 60 or so wounded and retreated into the Immortal's cave. The experts of the three forces appeared one after another and forcefully broke the defense array of the cave residence. They rushed in with great momentum. What they did not expect was that when they showed their flags and rushed into the cave residence, they did not encounter any large-scale resistance. They easily killed their way to the core of the cave residence and surrounded the Qingfeng region master's cave residence. They had no choice. He was just a region master and a 7th heaven realm high-level god king. The forces under him were limited. Even if the Qingfeng region master resisted with all his strength, he could not block the attacks of the three forces. Chapter 4106. The three forces had thought that the territorial lord would put up a symbolic resistance. At the very least, he would lead the soldiers to charge a few times and sacrifice some soldiers to show his loyalty to the Shura god emperor. Then he would choose to surrender, saying that the enemy was too powerful and he couldn't let his soldiers die in vain. That way he could avoid too many casualties and preserve the strength of the territorial lord. At the same time, he could win the reputation of caring for his soldiers. Why not? But what the three forces didn't expect was, when they arrived at the residence of the precinct lord of Lightwind, the door to the magnificent palace opened. Hundreds of armored guards stood outside the residence, but they all maintained a dignified posture and didn't draw their swords to fight the enemy. When the gate of the palace opened, 2 messenger guards walked out of the main hall and arrived in front of the three forces. After bowing respectfully, the 2 messenger guards said that the territorial lord invited the leaders of the three forces in for a talk. Such a scene caused the leaders of the three forces to be stunned. They were somewhat baffled. They looked at each other and thought to themselves, "What's going on? We're here to attack the territorial lord. Not only did he not resist, but he even opened the door to welcome us? The territorial lord surrendered without a fight? That's too unbelievable. He must be up to something." The 3 leaders felt that something was wrong and suspected that the territorial lord was up to something. Therefore, the 3 of them hesitated to enter the main hall. It wasn't until the 2 messenger guards urged them that the 3 of them said that they wanted to enter with the elders. Unexpectedly, the 2 messenger guards had a serious expression and solemn tone as they said that the region lord had instructed that only the 3 leaders were allowed to enter. The 3 leaders were conflicted. They all thought that the territorial lord was up to something. Perhaps the territorial lord had set up a trap in the main hall and was waiting for them to walk into it. In the end, the two messengers couldn't stand it any longer and mocked the three leaders with a few words. The Divine Phoenix clan leader, Yuchi clan leader, and Su Balian were embarrassed and angry. But then they thought about it. They represented the Rebel Alliance and the Kenshin was behind the Rebel Alliance. If that was the case, it would be reasonable for the territorial lord of Light Wind to surrender. As for not allowing others to enter, it was probably because he was afraid of hurting his reputation. Therefore, the three leaders put away their bashful attitude and put on a confident and dignified posture as they walked side by side to the main hall. Of course, on the surface they appeared to be very confident and dignified, but in reality the three of them were fully alert. If there were any unexpected situations or abnormalities, they would immediately leave the hall. The 3,000 disciples guarding outside the palace would also immediately launch an attack and raze everything within a 10,000-mile radius to the ground. Under such circumstances, the three leaders could not think of any reason why the territorial lord of Qingfeng would not surrender. Unless the territorial lord of Lightwind was a loyal follower of the Shura god emperor, he would rather die with everyone than be humiliated and surrender. However, according to their investigation and the clues they had, the territorial lord of Clearwind was clearly not such a person. Moments later, the three leaders entered the main hall and met with the territorial lord of Qingfeng. In the splendid, brightly lit hall, there was only the realm master of Lightwind and a few of his trusted guards. The atmosphere in the main hall was very cold and cheerless. It was exceptionally quiet. After the two sides met, they greeted each other hypocritically and exchanged a few pleasantries. The territorial lord of Lightwind, who was dressed like a middle-aged scholar, appeared gentle and elegant. After greeting everyone, he also expressed his respect and admiration for the Kenshin. Hearing this, the three leaders' hearts sank back into their stomachs. At least, the territorial lord of Lightwind had made his attitude clear. He was somewhat close to the Kenshin and the Rebel Alliance. Then the territorial lord of Lightwind invited the three leaders to sit down and drink tea. They could discuss things slowly. Now that the three leaders were emboldened, they appeared rather confident and dignified. After all, they represented the face of the Rebel Alliance and the Kenshin. They could not be too weak. They had to appear strong. The Divine Phoenix clan leader said that the purpose of their visit was very simple. Everyone in the world knew, so the territorial lord of Lightwind did not have to pretend to be ignorant. As for sitting down and drinking tea, that was not necessary. After all, they were only here to inform the territorial lord of Lightwind. They just needed a sentence and an answer from the territorial lord of Lightwind. It was quickly settled. Patriarch Yuchi and Su Balian hurriedly agreed. They talked a lot about how the Shura god emperor's rule was dark and cruel, and how he did not care about the lives of the people. Kenshin was the bright light in the dark night, the hope in the midst of despair. Only the Kenshin cared about the world and the survival of hundreds of millions of people. They were willing to take on the responsibility of saving the people. That was why they established the Rebel Alliance. Naturally, the ancient clans and forces would not sit by and do nothing. They were all moved by the Kenshin's magnanimity and joined the Rebel Alliance. Finally, they brought up the main topic and stated their intentions. They hoped that the territorial lord of Lightwind would be able to see the bigger picture and prioritize the lives of the people. They hoped that he would stop being stubborn and helping the Shura god emperor enslave the people. As long as the territorial lord of Lightwind realized his mistake and was willing to submit to the Kenshin and return to the right path, everyone would be gratified. The people would also be grateful for his good deeds. In fact, the three leaders' intentions were very simple. They hoped that the territorial lord of Lightwind would surrender to the Rebel Alliance and not become an enemy of the Kenshin. However, they said it in a more euphemistic way, making it sound hot-blooded, righteous and generous. The territorial lord of Lightwind had already made up his mind. Previously, he had planned to appease the three leaders first. Then he would follow his plan and carefully discuss his surrender step by step. However, the three leaders were so impatient and went straight to the point that he could not refuse. He could only show a conflicted, hesitant and balanced expression. On the one hand, he sincerely expressed that he also cared about the people and did not want to see them suffer. On the other hand, he was, after all, the territorial lord appointed by the Shura god emperor. How could he be so treacherous? In short, the territorial lord of Lightwind revealed that he wanted to submit but was unwilling to betray the Shura god emperor. The three leaders could see clearly that the territorial lord of Lightwind had made up his mind to surrender. It was just that he had not negotiated the terms and expectations. Seeing this, the three leaders did not beat around the bush and directly explained the pros and cons. If the territorial lord of Lightwind surrendered, he did not need to do anything. He only needed to read an oath of surrender. After Kenshin took control of the boundless heaven continent, he would still be the territorial lord of Lightwind. There would be no change. However, if he refused to surrender, there would be no room for negotiation. The Rebel Alliance would definitely kill him and choose another powerhouse to take control of the Qingfeng territory. In any case, there was no shortage of divine king powerhouses on this continent, nor was there a shortage of talents who could take control of a territory. The three leaders' attitudes were very tough. Patriarch Yuchi even took out a divine warship and a jade slip and handed it to the territorial lord of Lightwind. It was either war or surrender. The territorial lord of Lightwind, who had been pondering, weighing and hesitating, was very tactful. He took the jade slip and began to read the oath of surrender. Chapter 4107. The territorial lord's tactfulness left the three leaders a little dumbfounded. They looked at each other and pondered for a moment before understanding the territorial lord's intentions. It was obvious that the realm lord of Lightwind had known that he would be targeted by the anti-rebels alliance. As the first territorial lord to be attacked by the rebel alliance, he would suffer a terrible fate if he resisted. In order to make an example out of him, the anti-rebellious alliance would most likely behead him in public to deter the domain masters of other domains. Unfortunately, his forces were weak and did not have the qualifications to fight against the rebel alliance. The imperial tutor could not even protect himself and could not send powerhouses and soldiers to reinforce him. If that was the case, he had to surrender to the Kenshin if he did not want to die. However, surrendering without a backbone would not only bring him no benefits, but he would also be ridiculed by the common people. Therefore, the territorial lord put on a welcoming posture and wanted to sit down and negotiate with the Kenshin. Unexpectedly, the Kenshin did not come. Only three forces came. Moreover, these three leaders represented the Kenshin and the Rebel Alliance, and their attitudes were unusually tough. The territorial lord's plan failed and he could not fall out with the Rebel Alliance, so he could only admit defeat. Even if the scene of him admitting defeat was not very honorable and would damage his reputation in the future, he could not care less. There were not many people in the hall anyway, so not many people knew about this. However, after he began to read the oath of surrender, he could no longer maintain his calm and poise. The nearly 1,000-word oath of surrender was basically swearing to the heavens, making all kinds of vows and restricting and binding oneself. The general idea was to admit defeat to the Rebel Alliance and submit to the Kenshin. He would never betray them and follow the will of the Kenshin as his highest command. If he had any disloyalty, betrayed the Kenshin, or deliberately harmed the interests of the Rebel Alliance, he would be punished by the heavens. The more the territorial lord read, the more frightened he became. He felt more despair and regret. If he had known that he would have to make such a harsh pledge of surrender, he would have taken the risk and argued for all the benefits and conditions from the Rebel Alliance. Now he was already halfway through his pledge of surrender. He was truly in a difficult position. If he gave up on reciting the oath of surrender now, he would have violated the first rule of the oath and would be punished by the heavens. Even if he was lucky enough to escape the wrath of the heavens, the leaders of the three forces would never agree to it. If they really fell out, he would be the one to suffer in the end. At the thought of this, the little bit of unwillingness in the territorial lord's heart disappeared. He obediently finished the oath of surrender, and his entire body lit up with divine light. A wisp of Taoist rhyme actually appeared on top of his head. In the depths of the firmament directly above the palace, there was even a sky full of lightning, and there were bursts of thunderous booms. Clearly, the heavenly Tao had already sensed his oath. Such a phenomenon proved that the vow to the heavenly Tao was valid. From now on, the territorial lord of Qingfeng was officially under Kenshin's command. He could not disobey him in the slightest. Otherwise, the heavenly Tao would punish him before the Kenshin and the Rebel Alliance did anything. So far, many experts had been forced by Ji Tianxing to make the vow to the heavenly Tao, but none of them had been punished by the heavens. However, Ji Tianxing did not think that the vow to the heavenly Tao was invalid. Those experts who had made the vow to the heavenly Tao would not dare to test the validity of the vow with their own lives. Similarly, when the territorial lord of Qingfeng saw the divine light around him, the Taoist rhyme above his head, and heard the thunderous booms deep in the firmament, he was also very afraid. He could clearly sense the vast and terrifying heavenly might. He no longer dared to have the slightest bit of hope. After the phenomenon of heaven and earth ended, he returned the jade slip to the Divine Phoenix clan leader. The Divine Phoenix clan leader put away the jade slip and saluted him. He said, "As the saying goes, a wise man submits to circumstances. Territorial Lord of Qingfeng, you will definitely be grateful for the wise choice you made today. Since the matter has been settled, Territorial Lord of Qingfeng, please go ahead. We will take our leave now." The three leaders did not forget that Ji Tianxing had given them a deadline of 6 days to meet in the Changshan territory. Now that half of the agreed time had passed, they could not delay any longer. They had to get to the Changshan territory as soon as possible. The territorial lord of Qingfeng frowned in confusion. He asked, "Everyone, does Kenshin not have any instructions for me?" He thought that since he had already joined the rebel alliance, Kenshin should at least give him some instructions or assign him some tasks, right? Unexpectedly, the three leaders shook their heads at the same time. The Yuchi clan leader explained, "Territorial Lord of Qingfeng, you only need to maintain order in the Qingfeng territory and not let the people suffer from the chaos of war. If there are any tasks that you need to complete, the alliance leader will give you another order." The territorial lord of Qingfeng nodded in understanding and sighed in relief. In fact, he had mixed feelings. He hoped that Kenshin would give him some instructions, which at least meant that Kenshin was paying attention to him and had expectations of him. But he was also afraid that Kenshin would order him to gather elite soldiers and join the battle. In that case, he would have to risk his life fighting against the Shura God Emperor's soldiers. It would be very dangerous. Fortunately, Kenshin did not give him any instructions. He was told to wait for orders, which was the best outcome. Seeing that the three leaders were about to turn and leave, he hurried to catch up with them. He said worriedly, "The three of you, I hope you can keep what happened today a secret. Don't spread it." He did not say the second half of the sentence, but everyone understood what he meant. If word got out, it would damage his image and reputation. The three patriarchs and the sect leader turned around to look at him, revealing a playful smile. Su Bailian chuckled. "Territorial Lord of Qingfeng will keep it a secret and we will not spread it. But we came here in such a grandiose manner, and with so many people watching, this news can't be concealed. It will still spread." The territorial lord of Qingfeng waved his hand and said, "It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if the people know the result as long as they don't know the details." "Of course not," Su Bailian answered immediately. The Divine Phoenix clan leader said confidently, "Of course we won't spread the news. You just need to take care of your trusted guards." The guards who stayed in the hall and witnessed the whole process were the territorial lord of Qingfeng's confidants. They would keep their mouths shut. Therefore, the territorial lord of Qingfeng's face and reputation would not be damaged too much. The gate of the palace opened. The territorial lord of Qingfeng personally saw the two clan leaders and Su Bailian out. Soon, more than 3,000 soldiers from the three forces left the territorial lord's mansion. They drove 3 divine ships and rushed to the Changshan territory. It would take at least 2.5 days to travel from the Qingfeng territory to the center of the Changshan territory. By the time they found the territorial lord's cave residence, the 3-day deadline would be up. Therefore, the 3 divine battleships were operating at full power. They traveled as fast as they could, not daring to delay at all. Chapter 4108. Just as the 3 forces were leaving the Clear Wind Domain Chief's manor, White Dragon's god-slaying warship had just entered the 9 Union region. There was no choice. When Ji Tianxing intercepted Qi Yan in the north, he was very far away from here. If it were the forces of the Rebel Alliance, they would need at least 7 to 8 days to rush back. For the god-slaying warship to reach the 9 Union region in 3 days, its speed was already unparalleled. At the same time, the news of the patrol commander Qi Yan and his 2,000 soldiers being intercepted by Kenshin also spread throughout the boundless heaven continent. After the news spread, it caused a huge sensation in the boundless heaven continent. Various forces, countless experts and hundreds of millions of citizens were all discussing it enthusiastically. Everyone was shocked and in awe of Kenshin's speed and valiant means. At the same time, the citizens were more favorable and more confident in the rebel alliance. Everyone was looking forward to when Kenshin could get rid of the imperial tutor and restore peace to the boundless heaven continent. Of course, with the previous incident of Kenshin intercepting Meng Shuai, everyone no longer doubted the authenticity of the news when they heard that Qi Yan was intercepted. The shock that this news brought to everyone also lessened by a lot. In everyone's opinion, Qi Yan was just a 9th-degree realm divine king. Even the peak divine king Meng Shuai was killed by Kenshin, so Qi Yan's death was only natural. The reason why everyone was discussing this matter was not to praise Kenshin's strength or how powerful he was. Instead, everyone felt that Kenshin's whereabouts were erratic, appearing and disappearing unpredictably. It was simply impossible to guard against him. Everyone wanted to know how Kenshin could travel across half of the boundless heaven continent in such a short period of time to hunt targets everywhere. Moreover, how did he know the other party's route? Many people speculated that Kenshin must have mastered an extremely profound technique to deduce the heavens and could see the future. There was also a portion of people who thought that Kenshin must have planted a spy under the imperial tutor to find out the inside story. Other than these two widely circulated theories, there were many other guesses. However, the vast majority of people still believed in these two statements. More people were leaning towards the latter. They felt that the Kenshin was extremely shrewd and had long planted spies under the imperial tutor. After this rumor spread, the imperial tutor's soldiers quickly learned about it, causing them to be anxious and suspicious of each other. Even the imperial tutor was suspicious and vigilant when he heard the news. It was late at night again. In the Nine Union region, in an alternate space hidden in the Sea of Clouds. This alternate space with a radius of more than 100,000 miles couldn't be called a blessed place, but a secret realm. Fortunately, the environment in the mystic realm was very beautiful, and the divine power of heaven and earth was also very abundant. Therefore, since thousands of years ago, this place had been built into the abode of powerhouses. For nearly 1,000 years, the Nine-Region Lord had been living here. There were nearly 100 guards guarding the entrance of the cave, and there were also more than 10,000 soldiers and guards, as well as the domain lord's relatives, living inside the cave. In the past few months, even if the Nine-Union region was peaceful and there were no official matters to deal with, the Nine-Union region lord did not cultivate in isolation. He had been paying attention to the movements of the outside world. Naturally, he knew that the Kenshin had established the rebel alliance, and that Jin Shuang and Meng Shuai had been intercepted and killed. Today he also learned that the patrol commander Qi Yan had been intercepted and killed by the Kenshin. At this time he was still sitting in the study, discussing important military matters with the deputy region lord and two heavenly generals. Under the dim yellow light his expression was very serious. His brows were knitted together and he seemed to have a lot on his mind and was full of worries. Although the deputy region lord and the two heavenly generals were comforting him and persuading him that the Kenshin had intercepted and killed Commander Qi Yan in the north and had not yet returned to Yenshu's grotto heaven, the Nine-Union region should be safe. However, the Nine-Union region lord's mood was not relaxed at all, and he did not listen to the three's persuasion. Now there are only a few powerhouses left under the God Emperor to guard the boundless heaven continent. The imperial tutor is alone, and the people of the 100 territories are divided. I'm afraid that this time the world is going to be turned upside down. The Nine-Union region lord said earnestly, Kenshin has just killed Qi Yan and now he has two choices. The first is to continue to the north and assassinate the imperial tutor. As long as he kills the imperial tutor, the 100 territories will be leaderless, and the rebel alliance will win without a fight. However, the imperial tutor's headquarters in the Dark Night region is surrounded by countless powerhouses, and it will be very difficult to assassinate him. The second choice is to return to Yenshu's grotto heaven and lead the rebel alliance's army to conquer the various territories. The deputy region lord and the two heavenly generals heard and said in unison, Kenshin will most likely choose the second option to be safe. The Nine-Union region lord nodded and said, that's right. The safest and most honorable way is to lead the rebel alliance to conquer the various territories, and finally encircle and kill the imperial tutor. Therefore, we don't have much time left and we have to make a choice as soon as possible. The deputy region lord frowned and said, We reported this to the Imperial Tutor 10 days ago and asked for reinforcements. However, the Imperial Tutor's general replied that the various territories are asking for reinforcements, and there is no military force to support us. If the Rebel Alliance's army comes, we can't stop them with our little power. The 9 Union Region Lord nodded slightly and said with a serious face, "Not only that, I also received a top-secret message today. A few forces of the Rebel Alliance left Yenshu's Grotto Heaven a few days ago, and they set off in 2 different directions." What? I thought Kenshin hasn't returned to Yenshu's Grotto Heaven yet? Why did they start earlier? The 2 heavenly generals were shocked and their faces changed drastically. The 9 Union Region Lord sneered, "With Kenshin's prestige, does he need to return to Yenshu's Grotto Heaven personally to give an order? He just needs to send a message and announce an order. Who dares to disobey?" The Deputy Region Lord and the 2 heavenly generals were silent, and their hearts were heavy. One of the heavenly generals still had hope and said, "Even if the Rebel Alliance's army has started to move, they will start from the nearest few territories, such as Qingfeng Territory and Changshan Territory. The Rebel Alliance will conquer those 2 territories first and then attack us, right?" This was also the Deputy Region Lord and the other heavenly general's thoughts, and both of them nodded subconsciously. However, the 9 Union Region Lord sneered and said in a low voice, "Kenshin has always been elusive, accurate and fast. The Rebel Alliance's army set off a few days ago, and I guess Changshan Territory and Qingfeng Territory have already changed hands? I'm afraid it will be our turn in 2 days at the latest." His tone was so certain that the Deputy Region Lord and the 2 heavenly generals could not refute him, and they froze on the spot. What should we do, Region Lord?" The 9 Union Region Lord looked at the 3 of them and said in a serious tone, "Tonight everyone must come to a consensus and make a choice. Do we surrender or do we fight?" The Deputy Region Lord and the 2 heavenly generals looked at each other, and their expressions were somewhat bitter. The Deputy Region Lord smiled bitterly and asked, "Can't we avoid the brunt of the attack and go into hiding for a few years?" The 9 Union Region Lord sneered, "Give the 9 Union Region to Kenshin? Might as well surrender." Chapter 4109. Of course, running away was unrealistic. There were only 2 choices in front of everyone: surrender or resist. After a moment of silence, the Deputy Region Master and the 2 heavenly generals raised their heads at the same time and said in unison, "Then surrender." They all knew their limits. With their strength and manpower, they would be digging their own graves if they really fought the Rebel Alliance's army. Being loyal to the Azura God Emperor was important, but their own lives were the most important. In any case, the Imperial Tutor would not send reinforcements at this critical juncture. Even if they chose to surrender, they would not have any psychological burden. They would even feel a sense of relief from the fact that they had been heartless. Seeing that the Deputy Region Master and the 2 heavenly generals had made their choice, the 9-fold Region Master no longer hesitated. She nodded and said, "If that's the case, then surrender. There's no shame in losing to the Rebel Alliance and surrendering to the Kenshin. It's not just us. I'm afraid no one in the entire Boundless Heaven continent is a match for the Kenshin. Even the Imperial Tutor has no chance of winning against the Kenshin. So it's pardonable for us to surrender, isn't it?" Perhaps she was afraid that the atmosphere would be awkward, so the 9-fold Region Master explained a lot to absolve herself. The Deputy Region Master and the 2 heavenly generals hurriedly nodded in agreement. At first they were a little ashamed, afraid that the news would spread and they would be laughed at by the people. After hearing the 9-fold Region Master's words, they felt more at ease. Next, the 4 of them prepared to discuss how to surrender to the Rebel Alliance, how to negotiate with the other party, and what conditions to put forward. Surrendering was surrendering, but they still had to discuss the conditions that should be discussed and the benefits that should be obtained. However, at this moment the door of the study suddenly opened. With a soft creak, the door opened as if it had been blown open by a gust of wind. The 9-fold Region Master, the Deputy Region Master, and the 2 heavenly generals were all shocked and instinctively turned to look at the door. When they entered the study to discuss matters, they had clearly closed the door of the study and activated the defensive formation. Not to mention being blown open by the wind. Even if the guards forced the door open, it would not be able to open it. At this moment the same thought appeared in everyone's minds at the same time. Could it be that a powerhouse broke into the cave residence to assassinate us? But when everyone thought about it, that didn't seem right either. If there really was an expert who came to assassinate us, they would have been discovered long ago. There should also be sounds of fighting outside. That is, unless the person who came is very strong and the guards and hidden sentries we set up didn't discover him. At the thought of this, the hearts of the 4 divine kings were raised, and they subconsciously took out their divine weapons. At the same time, a white light flashed and the door of the study closed with a bang. The 4 of them were frightened and stood up subconsciously. They only saw a blur in front of their eyes before a figure appeared in the study. It was a handsome young man in a white robe, who exuded an invisible pressure and aura. Even though this young man did not have a trace of killing intent, and his expression and eyes were very calm as he looked at them. However, the 4 of them were filled with fear. It was as if they had fallen into an ice cellar and their bodies were cold. Their expressions changed drastically and their eyes widened in fear. Even their hands began to tremble. Among the 4 of them, only the ninefold region master was relatively calm. No matter how nervous and frightened he was, at least he didn't lose his composure. Kenshin. After a moment, the 4 of them calmed down a lot and the ninefold region master tried to ask. In fact, they had not seen Kenshin with their own eyes, but they had seen Kenshin's portrait and heard many descriptions of Kenshin's appearance. They already had an answer in their hearts. They were 80% sure that the white-robed young man in front of them was Kenshin. However, they still had to ask to confirm the other party's identity. Ji Tianxing did not answer the ninefold region master. Instead, he took out a jade slip and threw it in front of the ninefold region master. He said calmly, "Since you've decided to surrender, then recite the oath of surrender." Seeing his reaction, the ninefold region master and the other 3 were basically sure that the white-robed young man was Kenshin. At the same time, they also understood that their previous conversation had been heard by Kenshin a long time ago. When they thought of this, the 4 of them felt even more ashamed and humiliated. Fortunately, other than that sentence, Kenshin did not say anything else, nor did he mock or humiliate them. Kenshin only looked at the ninefold region master quietly and waited patiently. The study was very quiet and the atmosphere was somewhat awkward and depressing. The deputy region master and the 2 divine generals did not know what to do. They all looked at the ninefold region master and waited for him to make a decision. The ninefold region master looked at the jade slip on the table and hesitated for a moment. However, he did not reach out to take it. He mustered up his courage and looked at Ji Tianxing. He tried to say, "Kenshin, everyone knows that you are very powerful. Naturally, we are no match for you. However, we are the subjects of the Shura God Emperor after all. We cannot surrender to the rebel alliance for no reason. There has to be an explanation." The ninefold region master was still dilly-dallying, thinking about how to phrase it. However, before he could finish speaking, Ji Tianxing interrupted him. Ji Tianxing glanced at him and said coldly, "You want to discuss terms with me?" The ninefold region master was at a loss for words. He did not know how to answer. He also did not expect Kenshin to be so direct. He did not know how to respond. Without waiting for him to answer, Ji Tianxing continued, "You are not qualified to discuss terms with me. There are only 2 choices in front of you. You can either surrender or die." After saying this, Ji Tianxing released an invisible pressure that enveloped the entire study. Suddenly, the ninefold region master and the others found it difficult to breathe. The circulation of their divine power was also slowed and blocked. A haze of fear covered their hearts. The entire study was sealed off by Ji Tianxing's invisible aura, so they could not call for help. Even if they shouted themselves hoarse, the guards outside the study would not be able to hear them. Moreover, the 4 of them knew that Kenshin was very powerful. If they desperately called for help, they were afraid that Kenshin would kill them instantly before the guards could come to their rescue. Therefore, the 4 of them wisely chose to shut up and gave up on the idea of calling for help. After all, they were the most powerful people. It was not realistic to expect the 2,000 to 3,000 divine lords to save them. Looking at the situation before them, Kenshin was certain to defeat them. Moreover, they did not doubt Kenshin's determination and methods at all. Kenshin had killed powerful people like Lian Jinshuang, Qi Yan and Meng Shuai without batting an eyelid. For small fries like them, if they really angered the sword god, it would be as simple as crushing a few ants. Thinking of this, the deputy region master and the 2 divine generals were a little anxious. They looked at the ninefold region master and used their eyes to tell him to stop hesitating and digging his own grave. Quickly admit defeat and surrender to Kenshin. It would be good for you, good for me, and good for everyone. If we really angered the sword god and casually killed the few of us, then our deaths would be too aggrieved. The ninefold region master saw the meaning in their eyes. His heart was filled with sadness and despair. Helplessly, he held on for less than 10 seconds before bowing his head to Ji Tianxing. Kenshin, please calm down. I admit defeat and surrender to you. Chapter 41:10. The ninefold region master chose to lower his head, admit defeat and surrender. This meant that he had given up on the illusion of negotiation and abandoned the dignity and reputation of a region master. This was because he understood that the dignity and reputation of a region master were not worth mentioning in the eyes of Kenshin. Moreover, dignity and reputation were insignificant when compared to life. Surviving was the most important thing. He obediently picked up the jade slip and began to recite the oath of surrender in front of Ji Tianxing, the deputy region master, and the two heavenly generals. However, his expression and reaction seemed to be a little sullen. After reading the oath of surrender, not only him, but even the deputy region master and the two heavenly generals felt even more sullen. However, the ninefold region master had already destroyed his wishful thinking and decided to surrender. He would not hesitate anymore. No matter how harsh the contents of the oath of surrender were, he could only bite the bullet and continue reading. The deputy region master and the two heavenly generals felt their scalps tingle and chills run down their spines when they heard the series of oaths to the heavens and all kinds of willing to be punished by the heavens. As for the ninefold region master, while feeling humiliated and indignant, he actually had a different thought. He was thinking that the Qingfeng region master and the Changshan region master must have also recited the same oath of surrender not long ago, right? He wondered how those two fellows felt when they recited the oath of surrender. Are you also very shocked, sullen, and unwilling to accept this? When he thought of the two region masters being defeated, the ninefold region master was actually not so sad and indignant. He also felt much better. In a short while he finished reciting the oath of surrender. The deputy region master and the two heavenly generals had just breathed a sigh of relief when they saw the ninefold region master's entire body lit up with five-colored divine light. A wisp of Taoist rhyme appeared above his head. At the same time, in the sky above the study, tens of thousands of lightning bolts lit up, and there was the sound of heavenly thunder. It was obvious that the oath of the heavenly Tao had been established. The ninefold region master could clearly sense that the terrifying heavenly might was enveloping him. It was as if the heavens were watching him all the time. If he dared to have any thoughts of betrayal and violate any of the terms of the oath, he would immediately be punished by the heavens. When this thought flashed through his mind, the ninefold region master shuddered. Although the deputy region master and the two heavenly generals did not understand what was going on, they had a premonition that the matter was very serious. They immediately felt a trace of sympathy for the ninefold region master. A moment later, the phenomenon disappeared. The nine region lord respectfully returned the jade slip to Ji Tianxing. Since he had already surrendered and pledged his allegiance to Kenshin, he no longer harbored any illusions. He respectfully said, "Kensama, this subordinate has sincerely surrendered. From now on I will be Lord Kenshin's lackey. If there is anything you need, please do not hesitate to tell me." Ji Tianxing put away the jade slip and said expressionlessly, "Guard the nine union region well and don't let the people suffer the pain of war." In addition, the enslavement of the common people was to be stopped immediately and their freedom restored. If there is anything else, I will send another order to inform you. After that, Ji Tianxing turned around and pushed open the door of the study, his figure disappearing into the darkness. The nine unity region master and the other three hurriedly walked to the door of the study and respectfully sent Ji Tianxing off. After Ji Tianxing had disappeared for a long time, the four of them finished their salutes and silently returned to the study. The door of the study closed again. It was also very quiet outside, as if nothing had happened. The four of them were silent for a long time. In order to ease the awkwardness, the deputy region lord said, "I have always heard about how extraordinary Kenshin's demeanor is. After seeing it with my own eyes tonight, the rumors are indeed true." The two heavenly generals hurriedly nodded in agreement and praised, as expected of Kenshin. Not to mention his appearance and temperament, just his pressure and aura alone are superior to that of any god king. In this world, I'm afraid that other than the 5 god emperors, no one can compete with Kenshin. For insignificant characters like us to be able to see Kenshin in person and come out unscathed, that is also an amazing thing. The deputy region lord and the 2 heavenly generals desperately flattered Kenshin, calling him the most powerful person below the 5 god emperors. Their purpose was to show that their side's surrender to Kenshin was pardonable and understandable. Not to mention that they had to surrender to Kenshin. Any other god king would not be able to withstand Kenshin's pressure. Therefore it was only natural for them to admit defeat, surrender, and recite the humiliating oath of surrender. Sure enough, the 9-fold region lord's expression eased a lot. He stopped talking about this topic and muttered to himself, I really didn't expect the sword god's speed to be so fast. I just received news today that he had intercepted and killed Commander Qi Yan in the north. As a result, he came to the 9-fold region tonight. Such speed is unparalleled in the world and no one can match him. The deputy region lord and the 2 heavenly generals hurriedly nodded in agreement. The 9-fold region lord continued, I have thought many times about what to do after meeting Kenshin. I did not expect it to be in such a way. But even admitting defeat and surrendering was done so carelessly. More importantly, Kenshin did not take me seriously at all. He did not even give me any instructions, let alone assign me any tasks. At this point, the 9-fold region lord laughed self-deprecatingly. The deputy region lord hurriedly comforted him and said, Your Excellency, Kenshin's speed shows that he is very busy. Naturally, he would not waste time. Moreover, it is not just you. The Changshan region lord and the Qingfeng region lord must have received the same treatment. If you don't believe me, you can see what they will do in the future. The 2 heavenly generals also comforted the 9-fold region lord and said, Your Excellency, didn't Kenshin assign you a task? That's right. Kenshin asked you to save the people of the 9-fold region and return their freedom. This is a great good deed and merit. When the time comes, millions of people will be deeply grateful to you. Hearing this, the 9-fold region lord's eyes lit up and he was in high spirits. At the very least, he had found something to do and could prove that he was of value. Since he had pledged allegiance to Kenshin, he naturally hoped to make some achievements and win Kenshin's favor. After leaving the 9-fold region lord's cave residence, Ji Tianxing asked Bai Long to drive the deity-slaying battleship to the Changshan region. At the same time, he also sent 2 messages to ask about the Divine Phoenix clan leader, Yuqi clan leader and Su Baoyan's movements, as well as the progress of Nangong Buhua and the others. In less than 15 minutes, the Divine Phoenix clan leader was the first to send back a message. They reported to Ji Tianxing that they had subdued the Qingfeng region lord and forced him to swear the oath of surrender. The process was very smooth. At the moment they were leaving the Qingfeng region and were on their way to the Changshan region. After a while, Nangong Buhua also sent back a message to report to Ji Tianxing. The 6 forces had already started their operation and had successfully subdued a region lord in the south of Yenshu's cave heaven. The region lord was already mentally prepared and was in awe of Kenshin. Therefore, when Nangong Buhua and the others found the region lord, they did not encounter any strong resistance. The region lord naturally surrendered. Chapter 41:11. Up until now, the Rebel Alliance had split into 3 operations and everything was going smoothly. The main reason was that the few territories they attacked were all around Yenshu's grotto heaven. These territorial rulers had expected that the Rebel Alliance would attack them first. Therefore, 10 days ago they had sent a message to the Imperial Tutor asking for help. Unfortunately, the Imperial Tutor could not even take care of himself. He was busy deploying his troops to carry out his plan. How could he spare the manpower to help the territories? When the territorial rulers saw that the Imperial Tutor was not helping, they had the thought that they did not have to be loyal to the Imperial Tutor and the Azura God Emperor. Since you don't care about our lives, you have nothing to complain about when we surrender and betray you. With this thought in mind, when the Rebel Alliance came knocking on their door, they surrendered without hesitation. Ji Tianxing encouraged Nangong Buhua and the others and asked them to continue with the original plan and not be careless. Nangong Buhua sent a message back saying that he would be cautious and was rushing to the next territory. One day later, Ji Tianxing was the first to arrive at the Changshan territory. The Phoenix tribe, Yuqi tribe and 100 Refinement Ancient sect had yet to enter the Changshan territory. Even if they rushed over as fast as they could, it would still take them 1.5 days to meet up with Ji Tianxing. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing decisively went to the Changshan territory ruler's cave residence alone to force him to surrender. He sent a message to the Phoenix tribe, Yuchi tribe and 100 Refinement ancient sect, saying that he had already subdued the ninefold territory ruler and that they did not need to rush to the Changshan territory. When the divine Phoenix tribe leader and the others received the message, they were shocked and could not believe it. A few days ago, Ji Tianxing was still trying to kill Qi Yan in the north. Yesterday, Ji Tianxing had already subdued the ninefold territory ruler. Now, before they could reach the Changshan territory, Ji Tianxing had already arrived. Not to mention the fact that Ji Tianxing alone had the confidence to subdue the Changshan territorial lord. Just his unparalleled speed was enough to stun everyone. The god kings and disciples of the three forces were completely convinced of Ji Tianxing's power and felt even more reverence for him. With regards to Ji Tianxing's orders, they did not dare to delay in the slightest. They hurriedly changed their direction and headed to the next area. They only had 3 divine warships and 3,000 soldiers. However, with their previous experience and the might of the rebel alliance in the Kenshin, they were fearless. This time they were all full of energy. They wanted to rush to the next domain as quickly as possible and subdue the domain lord. They also wanted the sword god to look at them in a different light and recognize their efficiency. For the same reason, Nangong Buhua and the others who were marching on the other side had the same thought. Ji Tianxing didn't think too much about it. He stayed in the distorted space-time and meditated, nourishing his foundation of the divine path and continuing to refine the godhead fragments of the god kings. Last time he still had more than 40 godhead fragments to refine. After killing Qi Yan, he obtained another 40 godhead fragments. He would probably be busy refining those godhead fragments for a long time. The god-slaying battleship was super fast. It took less than a day to cover a distance that a king-level divine warship would take 2 days to cover. A day later, the god-slaying battleship arrived at the Changshan territory and found the Changshan territorial lord's residence. It was a group of palaces floating in the sea of clouds. There were many divine arrays protecting it as well as a large group of elite guards and many god kings. At this time, Ji Tianxing had been in seclusion in the distorted space-time for 50 days and refined another 10 godhead fragments. Even though he still had more than 70 godhead fragments, he could only put them aside and deal with the Changshan territorial lord first. The night was dark and there were few stars in the night sky. At the peak of the white sea of clouds, the majestic palaces flickered with golden light in the dark night. It was very dazzling. Ji Tianxing put away the god-slaying battleship when he was still tens of thousands of miles away. He stepped through the sea of clouds alone, silently approaching the group of palaces. He concealed his whereabouts and aura. Even when he arrived at the square outside the palaces, the patrolling guards did not notice him. The Changshan territorial lord was probably the same as the other territorial lords. He had expected that the rebel alliance would attack him. Therefore, the defense of the palaces was very tight. Even the number of patrolling guards was higher than usual. The defensive formations all over the palace complex were also in an activated state, and they could be considered to be on full alert. However, these did not pose a threat to Ji Tianxing. They also could not stop him from sneaking into the palaces. He first released his divine sense and used his divine sense to investigate the situation in the palaces. After about 100 breaths, he had a sufficient understanding of the situation in the palaces. There were more than 15,000 people living in the palaces. Among them, there were more than 4,000 monarch god experts. Most of them were guards. There were more than 10 god king experts. Among them, there was only one 6th heaven realm god king. Ji Tianxing locked onto the 6th heaven realm god king's aura. He carefully compared it with the Changshan territorial lord's information and confirmed that he was the Changshan territorial lord. Before he came, he was worried that the Changshan territorial lord would make a mistake and run away. If that was the case, it would be troublesome for him to subdue the Changshan territorial lord. Fortunately, the Changshan territorial lord did not do such a stupid thing. This saved Ji Tianxing a lot of time and effort. He remained invisible and quietly passed through several layers of defensive arrays. He sneaked into the palaces. Along the way, he successfully avoided many patrolling guards and more than 10 hidden sentries. He went straight into the depths of the palaces. In the middle of the palaces, The most majestic palace was the Xianxia territorial lord's residence. It was also the main hall where he usually held meetings. However, the Xianxia territorial lord was very cautious. He did not live there. Instead, he hid in an inconspicuous palace in the depths of the palaces. At this moment, the Xianxia territorial lord was in the study, discussing matters with a few of his trusted generals. He had 5 trusted subordinates. Other than the deputy territorial lord, there were 3 god generals and a governor. It was not known what they were discussing in low voices. Everyone's expression was very solemn. The dim light in the study shone on the Xianxia territorial lord's face. It made him frown and ponder. It made him look even more haggard. Perhaps it was because they were discussing an important issue. The few of them fell silent, looking helpless and dejected. At this moment, Zhi Tianxing was like a transparent ghost. He passed through the layers of barriers and hidden sentries and arrived outside the study. He stopped to listen for a moment. When he saw that there was no movement in the study, he knew that the Xianxia territorial lord and the others had not made up their minds. However, he did not want to waste any time. He raised his hand and shot out a few rays of divine light. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. In a split second, the 4 guards who were 10 steps away were knocked unconscious by the divine light. Their bodies fell slowly. They were about to hit the ground, making a loud noise. However, before they fell, Zhi Tianxing waved his hand and shot out a vast amount of divine power. It formed a light shield with a radius of 1,000 feet and covered the entire palace. Even if the 4 guards fell to the ground and made muffled thuds, it would not alarm the people outside the light shield. However, the Xianxia territorial lord and the others in the study were immediately alarmed. Chapter 41:12. The Xianxia territorial lord and the others were startled when they heard the commotion outside the study and sensed the fluctuation of divine power. Their expressions changed at the same time. Without any hesitation, they drew out their divine weapons and held them in their hands. They then let out a furious roar. "Who's there?" As soon as they roared, they sensed an invisible, majestic divine power sealing off the entire palace. Then they heard the thuds of 4 guards falling to the ground. The few divine kings were all people with abundant experience and immediately realized that there was a powerful enemy attacking. They spread out and occupied every corner of the study. They stared at the door warily. No one opened the door of the study to avoid being attacked by a powerful enemy. They all stared at the door of the study, secretly accumulating their divine power, ready to unleash a thunderous attack at any moment. After 2 short breaths, the door of the study was indeed pushed open. A white figure appeared at the door and stepped into the study calmly. The Xianxia territorial lord and the others immediately focused on the white-robed young man. When the crowd saw his appearance clearly and sensed his divine power, aura and pressure, their expressions changed instantly. They were extremely shocked and terrified. Although they had never seen Kenshin with their own eyes, they knew that the white-robed young man was Kenshin the moment they saw him. They were just discussing how to deal with the Rebel Alliance's upcoming attack, how to face Kenshin and negotiate with Kenshin. They did not expect that Kenshin would come to them before they could come to a conclusion. He came so quickly and so suddenly that they were caught off guard. For a moment, the Xianxia territorial lord and the others were stunned. They stared blankly as Kenshin walked into the study. They did not make a sound or move. It was not until Kenshin walked to the large desk and sat down that the Xianxia territorial lord and the others came back to their senses. They looked at each other and saw the panic and nervousness in each other's eyes as well as deep worry. Zhi Tianxing sat down casually. He glanced at everyone indifferently and finally fixed his gaze on the Xianxia territorial lord. "What, aren't you going to say hello to me?" This was unreasonable. He was the one who had barged into the Xianxia territorial lord's residence in the middle of the night, uninvited, and barged into his study. Instead of greeting the other party, he asked the other party to greet him. They had gone too far. But who was he? "He's a Kenshin." The Xianxia domain lord and the others didn't find anything wrong with it, nor did they get angry over it. The main thing was that he did not dare to do so. Cough cough. "No, I am the Xianxia territorial lord. Greetings to Lord Kenshin." The Xianxia territorial governor quickly calmed himself down and tried his best to remain calm. He bowed solemnly. The deputy domain master, 3 divine generals and 1 governor also came to their senses. They hurriedly followed the example of the Changshan domain master and bowed to Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly to express his satisfaction. Without further ado, he took out a jade slip and threw it in front of the Changshan territorial lord. Since you are already discussing the matter of surrendering, make a decision now. I'll give you 10 breaths of time. Once you've made up your mind, you can recite the oath of surrender. If you haven't thought it through, then don't think about it anymore. Hearing the last sentence, the Changshan territorial lord and the others trembled. Fear flashed in their eyes. Although the sword god said it casually, there was no killing intent. But everyone felt a chill down their spines. They felt terrified and helpless from the bottom of their hearts. Because they knew that Kenshin's attitude was so calm, because Kenshin had never regarded them as opponents. Everyone was in the same study. If Kenshin wanted to kill them, it would be as easy as lifting a finger. Therefore they only had 2 choices. Either submit or die. The Changshan territorial lord and the others were never impassioned, hot-blooded men who were brave enough to sacrifice themselves. On the contrary, old foxes like them who had lived for more than 10,000 years, cherished their lives more than anyone else. The 2 choices that Ji Tianxing threw out in fact did not seem like a choice to them. They already had an answer. Naturally, they would choose to admit defeat and surrender to save their lives. However, the Changshan territorial lord frowned and thought for a moment. He mustered his courage and asked, "Lord Kenshin, we admire your courage to rise in rebellion for the sake of the people of the boundless heaven continent. But after all, I am a subject of the Azure God Emperor. If you don't give me a suitable price, it will be very difficult for me to surrender just like that." Ji Tianxing was slightly surprised. He did not expect the Changshan territorial lord to be so bold and thick-skinned to speak so directly. Without waiting for the Changshan territorial lord to finish speaking, he sneered and said indifferently, "Price? Surrender and you will keep your life. You will still be the Changshan territorial lord in the future. If you don't, you will die immediately. Is that suitable?" As his voice fell, an invisible murderous aura spread throughout the study. Immediately, the Changshan territorial lord, the deputy territorial lord, the 3 divine generals and the governor all shuddered. Fear filled their eyes. At that moment they even felt the aura of death descending. They had long known that Kenshin was very powerful, but this was the first time they experienced that a divine king could be so powerful that they could not even muster the will to resist. They had no doubt that if Kenshin attacked, they would not even have the chance to call for help or escape. They would die instantly. Since the difference in strength between the 2 sides was so great, what right did they have to bargain with Kenshin? At that thought, the Changshan territorial lord did not waste any more time. He quickly took the jade slip with both hands and began to read the oath of surrender. The 1,000-word oath of surrender stunned the Changshan territorial lord. After he finished reading the first oath, his expression changed drastically. His eyes were filled with disbelief and humiliation. The deputy territorial lord, the 3 divine generals, and the governor also felt that the situation was not right. They all wanted to see the contents of the jade slip to see what the oath of surrender was. Ji Tianxing looked coldly at the Changshan territorial lord. An invisible pressure enveloped him. The Changshan territorial lord could not back down. After swallowing a few times, he could only force himself to continue reading. The result was predictable. As oath after oath appeared, his expression became uglier and uglier. He was sweating profusely. The deputy territorial lord, the 3 divine generals, and the governor were also shocked and aggrieved. Their hearts were filled with unwillingness. In the end, when the Changshan territorial lord finished reading the oath of surrender, his heart was dead. He was filled with despair. His entire body lit up with 5-colored divine light. A wisp of Taoist rhyme appeared above his head. Deep in the sky above the study, muffled thunder rumbled. The oath of the heavenly Tao had been completed. The Changshan territorial lord also sensed the mighty heavenly Tao's might, forming an invisible connection with him. He realized that the heavenly Tao had witnessed those oaths. If he dared to violate any of the oaths, he would be punished by the heavens. In other words, Kenshin did not have to monitor him or pay attention to him. He had to maintain his loyalty to Kenshin because of the heavenly Tao's supervision and deterrence. Such an outcome left only one thought in the Changshan territorial lord's mind. Too vicious, too ruthless. Chapter 41:13. The Changshan territorial lord stood rooted to the ground, a little dazed. Although he had surrendered to Ji Tianqing, he did not flatter him, nor did he ask for Ji Tianqing's instructions. She just stood there like that as if she had nothing left to live for. Ji Tianqing put away the jade slip, glanced at him and said expressionlessly, "Other than being loyal to me, you haven't changed at all. You don't have to look like you're seeking death. From now on, all the people of the Changshan territory will be free and their enslavement will be stopped. Other than that, if I have any tasks for you, I will send you an order." After that, Ji Tianqing got up and left the study, disappearing into the night. The Changshan territorial lord was still rooted to the ground. The deputy territorial lord, the 3 divine generals and the governor hurried to the door of the study, bowed to the night sky and respectfully sent Ji Tianqing off. After a long time, when Ji Tianqing was far away, the 4 of them returned to the study. The Changshan territorial lord had also come to his senses, and he sat on the chair with a dejected expression. Everyone hurried to comfort him and enlighten him. "Territorial lord, actually we all support your decision. It's no big deal to surrender to Kenshin. If you don't believe me, just watch. The territorial lords of the surrounding territories will definitely surrender." "That's right. Even the imperial tutor may not be Kenshin's match. It's normal for us to surrender. Territorial lord, you chose to surrender for the sake of the people of the Changshan territory. The people will definitely understand you." After hearing everyone's words of comfort, the Changshan territorial lord felt much better. He said in a low voice, "I understand what you're saying. I don't care about these things. I just feel that I haven't reaped any benefits, and I've surrendered in such a muddle-headed manner. It's really sullen. Moreover, I've made so many oaths and I'm still under the supervision of the heavenly Tao. From now on, I can only be loyal to Kenshin. There are no other choices or possibilities. If the Sword God's rebellion fails, I can only accompany him in death." It turned out that the reason why the Changshan domain master felt aggrieved and helpless was that he had lost his freedom and choice. If he could remain neutral, he could wait for the right price and obtain more benefits in the future. However, due to his vow to the heavenly Tao, he could only be loyal to Kenshin, so there was no possibility of that happening. The deputy region master, the 3 heavenly generals, and the governor looked at each other and tried to comfort him. "Since there is no other choice, we can only pray that Kenshin succeeds." "That's right. Looking at the current situation, as long as the Azura God Emperor doesn't return, Kenshin sweeping through the entire boundless heaven continent is practically a done deal." The few of them whispered in the study for a while. Not long after, the Changshan domain lord finally untied the knot in his heart and gradually calmed down. Next, he had to pull himself together and carry out the task given to him by Ji Tianqing. Restoring the freedom of all the citizens of the Long Mountain region was a huge project that could not be completed overnight. Ji Tianqing left the residence of the Changshan domain master. Bai Long steered the deity-slaying battleship and flew towards the northeast at lightning speed. He headed towards the next region to meet up with the Divine Phoenix clan leader and the rest. Although Ji Tianqing departed a day later, the distance was still slightly further. However, the speed of the deity-slaying battleship ensured that he and the Divine Phoenix clan leader and the rest would arrive at their destination at the same time. The next morning, the deity-slaying battleship was still on its way. A piece of news that came out of nowhere began to spread around Yenshu's heavenly abode. The rebel alliance led by Kenshin has begun their operation. In just a few days, Qingfeng, Jiuhe, and the other regions have been conquered by the rebel alliance. All the domain masters have surrendered. It was just a simple piece of news, but after it spread, it had an explosive effect and caused a huge sensation. In just a few hours, the news seemed to have grown wings and spread to the surrounding regions. Not only the major forces and empires, but also many citizens were talking about it. With all their previous experiences, the citizens had high hopes for the Kenshin Rebel Alliance. Even when they heard this shocking news, they did not think it was fake. Instead, they believed it to be true. Soon, the news was confirmed in Qingfeng, Jiuhe, and the other regions. After all, those 2 regions were the first to be conquered. The domain masters had followed Ji Tianqing's orders and issued orders to gradually restore the citizens' freedom. For nearly 1,000 years, the citizens had been under the dark rule of the Azura God Emperor. They had been oppressed and enslaved. If the Kenshin had not conquered those few regions, how could the domain masters issue orders to restore the citizens' freedom and stop their oppression and enslavement? After the news was confirmed, it spread even faster. With those few regions as the center, the news quickly spread in all directions. It had the potential to engulf the entire boundless heaven continent. The citizens were in an uproar. They cheered and celebrated the Kenshin and the Rebel Alliance. They treated the Kenshin as their saviors, A day later, more than 40 regions and half of the boundless heaven continent knew about this news. Thus, countless domain masters were in a state of panic. Hundreds of millions of citizens were filled with excitement and anticipation. They looked forward to the arrival of the Rebel Alliance's powerhouses. They also wanted the citizens of Qingfeng, Zhou and the other regions to regain their freedom as soon as possible and no longer be oppressed and enslaved. Of course, when this news spread across half of the continent, the imperial tutor in the Dark Night region in the far north also received the news. The news he received was far more detailed than the rumors outside. Not only did Qingfeng, Zhou and the other regions surrender, but the domain masters also surrendered very straightforwardly. They did not discuss any conditions with the Kenshin and directly surrendered. When he heard this news, the imperial tutor was so angry that his lungs almost exploded. His entire body erupted with soaring killing intent. He really wanted to teleport to Qingfeng, Zhou and the other regions and cut those traitorous domain masters into pieces. Only then could he vent the hatred in his heart. Damn bastards! You are all domain masters personally conferred by His Holiness the God Emperor. If not for His Holiness the God Emperor's support, how could you have such honorable positions? And now you don't want to serve His Holiness the God Emperor and be loyal to the God Emperor. When the Kenshin attacked, you actually surrendered without any backbone. How infuriating! The protectors and generals hurriedly persuaded the imperial tutor to calm down and comforted him for a long time. When the imperial tutor's emotions slowly calmed down, the protectors and generals said worriedly, "Imperial tutor, we can't go on like this. The Rebel Alliance will split into two groups and attack the various regions, one from the south and one from the north. If the various regions don't unite, no one will be a match for the Kenshin Alliance. Imperial tutor, you also know that those domain masters are greedy for life and afraid of death. Their forces are weak and they can't fight against the Kenshin Alliance. They can only choose to surrender. Imperial tutor, you have to quickly come up with an idea. We can't let the Kenshin conquer the various regions one by one." Under everyone's urging, the imperial tutor considered for a moment and ordered, "I don't have a good idea. I can only take advantage of this. Immediately issue an edict and summon all the domain masters to the Dark Night region." Chapter 41:14. Everyone knew that it was easy to be defeated one by one if hundreds of area masters were to spread out and guard their own territories. Not to mention the Kenshin, even if a few of the Rebel Alliance's forces went, those area masters would not be able to resist. In order to survive, it was inevitable to admit defeat and surrender. Thus, the imperial tutor could only think of this idea that could not be considered a solution. "Aren't you going to subdue those area masters one by one? Then I'll issue an order and gather all the area masters to the Dark Night area to form an inescapable trap and ambush." The Kenshin and the Rebel Alliance's 9 forces would be empty-handed when they arrived at the various territories. They could not subdue those area masters, but they could not attack ordinary citizens, right? Moreover, time did not allow them to appoint a new area master to take over those territories. After all, taking charge of a territory was not something that could be done in a short period of time. On the other hand, manpower was also a big problem. If the Rebel Alliance had to send out a group of godly kings and godly lords every time they attacked a territory to occupy a certain territory, then it would not be long before the Rebel Alliance had no one to use. In any case, there were hundreds of territories in the boundless heaven continent. Even if the Rebel Alliance occupied 50 territories, the imperial tutor would not panic. Now the Rebel Alliance had the initiative and attacked everywhere. The imperial tutor and the 100 area masters could only passively defend. If the Rebel Alliance occupied half of the continent, then the initiative would be handed to the imperial tutor. He could take the initiative to attack and destroy the Rebel Alliance's forces one by one. In short, the cheap trick he came up with was indeed effective. The protectors and generals thought for a moment and understood the imperial tutor's intention. They all nodded in agreement. Thus, the two protectors quickly drafted an edict and issued it as soon as possible. At the same time, Ji Tianxing boarded the god-slaying battleship and met up with the Divine Phoenix clan leader and the others. At this point, the 9 forces of the Rebel Alliance and Ji Tianxing officially split up and began their journey. Both sides advanced side by side, and they subdued 4 region lords in a short period of a few days with an unstoppable momentum. Wherever they went, they found the domain lords of the various domains and encountered almost no resistance. Those domain lords would usually put up a symbolic resistance, and after a few dozen of their subordinates were killed or injured, they would declare their defeat and surrender. Before surrendering, they had fantasized about negotiating terms with the Rebel Alliance and asking for some benefits. However, the Rebel Alliance's attitude was very unyielding. They directly threw out an oath of surrender and told them to read it. After those domain lords finished their oaths of surrender, they were like frosted eggplants, listless and almost shut themselves up. It couldn't be helped. This was also the first time they had come into contact with this kind of heavenly Tao oath. The content of the oath, which was close to 1,000 words, shocked them. After the oath was made, the phenomenon of heaven and earth, as well as the invisible pressure of the heavenly Tao, caused them to feel fear and terror. These domain lords were somewhat regretful, but there was nothing they could do. They could only accept their fate. The reason why these few domain lords tactfully surrendered was because of the news that spread throughout the entire boundless heaven continent during this period of time. Everyone knew that the Rebel Alliance had split into 2 groups, the North and the South, and had begun their attack. The domain lords of the surrounding regions of Xianxia Grotto Heaven heard the news and surrendered, and did not dare to resist. Therefore those few domain lords took the lead. When the other domain lords saw this, there were already a few domain lords who had taken the lead to surrender. They were not iron head dolls who were seeking death. Of course, there was no need to fight to the death. It was safer to surrender. Soon another 7 days had passed. As of now, the Rebel Alliance had subdued 10 domains, all of which were around Xianxia Grotto Heaven. As the domain lords announced their surrender one after another, all kinds of news began to spread throughout the boundless heaven continent. First, the Rebel Alliance was indeed as everyone thought. The Kenshin fought against the dark reign of the Azura God Emperor to save the people and restore everyone's freedom. Second, the Rebel Alliance had split into 2 groups, the North and the South, and were moving simultaneously. The group heading towards the south was led by the Nangong clan, followed by the Lan clan, Aries clan, Xia clan, Shimi Grotto Heaven and Jiang clan. There were a total of 6 ancient clans, and all of them had deep foundations and strong warriors. Not to mention a domain lord. Even if a few domain lords were to band together, they would not be a match for them. Therefore the South Army was like a hot knife through butter, and was successful in every endeavor. As for the group heading towards the north of Xianxia Grotto Heaven, there were only the Feng clan, Yuchi clan and the 100 Smelting Ancient sect. On the surface, these 3 forces could not be compared to the South Army, and their numbers were reduced by half. However, the North Army was personally led by the Kenshin. 1 Kenshin was equivalent to 10 ancient clans. Therefore, in the eyes of countless people, the North Army was the most valiant. Third, the goal of the Rebel Alliance was very clear, and that was to subdue the domain lords one by one. It was said that the oath of surrender personally revised by the Kenshin was very sacred and solemn, and was approved and supervised by the heavenly Tao. Those domain lords who surrendered had to recite the heavenly Tao oath. This news was obviously embellished by the people of the Rebel Alliance, and deliberately released by the Shimi Grotto Heaven's intelligence network. The purpose was to let the people think that the Kenshin and the Rebel Alliance were representing Tianxing, and that they represented justice and the will of the heavens. Those immortal king masters and top forces scoffed at this saying. However, the millions of people were more ignorant and naturally they believed it easily. Therefore the people cheered and were full of admiration for the Kenshin, and were full of anticipation for the Rebel Alliance. Especially those who were still living in the abyss of suffering and were enslaved and oppressed. They were looking forward day and night to the Rebel Alliance's early arrival to save them. Other than that, there was another piece of news that spread across the mainland. Not long ago, the imperial tutor personally issued a decree to all the domains in the mainland. The content of the decree was simple and straightforward, and it was to gather all the domain lords and gather at the Anya domain immediately. Although the decree did not state the reason and purpose. However, as long as one was not an idiot, one would know that this was the imperial tutor's countermeasure. In just half a month, the Rebel Alliance had conquered 10 domains in a row, and the Imperial Tutor could no longer sit still. The Imperial Tutor could not sit by and watch the Rebel Alliance continue, so he could only come up with this countermeasure to resolve the crisis. Countless forces, domain lords, empires, and people learned of this news, and after careful consideration, they all felt that the Imperial Tutor's move was not bad, and could indeed resolve the crisis. At least the Imperial Tutor could turn passive into active. He could turn the domains into empty cities and let the Rebel Alliance attack and occupy them. The Rebel Alliance would be empty-handed, and occupying those domains would waste time and manpower. If they did not occupy those domains, it would be equivalent to returning empty-handed, and it would be a waste of time. All in all, this was a brilliant plan. However, the key problem was, how many domain lords could the Imperial Tutor's decree mobilize? How many domain lords would continue to remain loyal and carry out the Imperial Tutor's orders? At such a chaotic juncture, most domain lords would probably weigh the pros and cons, right? Chapter 41:15. A few days later, new news spread across the boundless Heaven continent. The Rebel Alliance's armies in the north and south were still attacking cities and conquering territory after territory. In the process, the Rebel Alliance would also eliminate targets on the death list. More than a dozen godly kings and 8 forces loyal to the Azura God Emperor were eradicated by the Rebel Alliance. At the same time, more than 30 territorial lords had rushed to the Dark Knight domain with their families and loyal subordinates. These territorial lords were all loyal supporters of the Azura God Emperor and would naturally be loyal to the Imperial Tutor's orders. They would rather temporarily give up their positions as territorial lords and gather by the Imperial Tutor's side. Firstly, it could save their lives and be safer. Secondly, it could show their loyalty. However, they could not leave for too long. They had to return to the territory they ruled in a year at the latest. Otherwise, too many things would happen in the next year and the entire domain would be in chaos. Other than the 30 or so territorial lords who took the lead to express their stance, the remaining dozens of territorial lords were still hesitating and weighing the pros and cons. Even if the Imperial Tutor issued another decree and urged them with harsh words, they were unmoved and were still observing the situation. After all, they were all relatively far away and would not be attacked by the Rebel Alliance for the time being. They were still considered safe. Moreover, they were unwilling to give up their positions as territorial lords and return to the Dark Knight domain. These territorial lords all understood that in their own domains, they were the noble kings. Once they returned to the Dark Knight domain, they would be soldiers under others and at their beck and call. Moreover, after leaving their own domains, no one knew what would happen and the future could not be predicted. They did not dare to take risks easily. Of course, the most important reason was that the Rebel Alliance had also responded and counterattacked. When Zhi Tianxing learned that the Imperial Tutor had issued a decree and that many territorial lords had rushed to the Dark Knight domain with their families, he immediately thought of a way to deal with it. Since those territorial lords are loyal to the Azura God Emperor, we don't have to be merciful to them. They are rushing to the Dark Knight domain, but they will leave behind many trusted generals to help them control the various domains. The Imperial Tutor thought that we were pursuing speed, so we wouldn't stop or waste time occupying these areas. Then we'll kill the trusted aides left behind by those domain lords, eliminate the forces they control in the various domains, and let those domains break free from their control. Of course, we won't split our forces and waste time conquering the various regions. That was to pick a puppet from the first-rate forces of each domain to control that domain. If you can think of a better way, please send a message to me as soon as possible and let me decide. This was Zhi Tianxing's order, and it was quickly passed on to the various forces. The day after he gave the order, he led the northern army into a certain domain and headed straight for the domain lord's cave residence. When he arrived at the cave residence, he discovered that the domain master had fled with his family and subordinates the day before, heading for the Dark Knight domain. Zhi Tianxing was not angry. He led the Phoenix race, Yuchi race, and the 100 Refinements ancient sect to destroy the territorial lord's cave dwelling. A secret realm with a radius of 100,000 miles was shattered into pieces by his shocking divine ability and scattered in the void. More than 10,000 soldiers under the territorial lord's command were buried with the secret realm. Not even their bones were left. In addition, Ji Tianxing also led an army of 3,000 to eradicate the forces controlled by the territorial lord. He assassinated more than 10 trusted aides, including 3 empire lords. Although he did waste 3 days doing so. However, Ji Tianxing destroyed the territorial lord's direct forces in an unstoppable manner. The forces that the territorial lord had spent hundreds of years to accumulate were destroyed in an instant. The domain also broke free from the territorial lord's control and fell into a state of chaos. At least, no one enslaved and oppressed the common people anymore. The common people of the various empires rose up and resisted. For a time, the various empires were also in a state of war, tired of dealing with the common people's counterattacks. The entire domain was in chaos. A day later, the territorial lord was still on his way to the Dark Night domain. When he heard the news, he was so angry that he vomited 3 bowls of blood on the spot and almost fainted. Hey, didn't you claim to be a benevolent and righteous teacher, representing the heavenly Tao and justice? How can you be so cruel and vicious, killing tens of thousands of soldiers and plunging the entire domain into the flames of war? Before the territorial lord fainted, he roared at the sky like a madman. There was no other way. His life's work had been destroyed, and his position as territorial lord existed in name only. How could he not go crazy? After shouting these 2 sentences, his neck tilted and he fainted. At this time, the few trusted generals, military counselors, and deputy territorial lords who followed him began to panic. Everyone thought to themselves, "Territorial lord, oh territorial lord." Previously, everyone advised you not to escape to the Dark Night domain. We would rather observe the situation first, but you insisted on being stubborn. Now you know that you were wrong, right? Kenshin is indeed speaking on behalf of Tianxing and saving the common people, but it doesn't mean that he is holy and kind and won't kill people. Don't forget, the reason why Kenshin has today's fame is because he killed millions and stepped on piles of corpses. To us, Kenshin is a cruel and vicious executioner. But in the eyes of the common people, we are the evil ones. Kenshin is eliminating evil and promoting kindness. Obviously, after the territorial lord had lost his power, the deputy territorial lords and generals under his command had also developed resentment and other thoughts. 2 days later, the rebel alliance's southern army encountered a similar situation. When Nangong Buhua led 6 forces and 6,000 soldiers to a certain region, they discovered that the territorial lord had escaped in the middle of the night. Not only did the territorial lord take away his trusted generals and godly king experts, but he also took away his family and treasure trove. The huge secret realm cave abode was like an empty city. Only tens of thousands of ordinary soldiers were left. Nangong Buhua decisively ordered the 6,000 soldiers to attack the cave abode and destroy it in a few hours. The secret realm was shattered and the tens of thousands of soldiers were not left behind. After destroying the territorial lord's cave abode, Nangong Buhua split up the 6 forces to eliminate the territorial lord's direct subordinates. At the same time, Nangong Buhua chose a force in the region and supported this force to take over the territorial lord's position. This force was one of the top 3 forces in the region and had always had conflicts and grudges with the territorial lord. However, they were always suppressed. The grudges between the 2 sides had accumulated for a long time. Now that the territorial lord had escaped and the cave abode had been destroyed, this force took the opportunity to join the rebel alliance without hesitation. They swore to be loyal to the Kenshin. The result was obvious. That force naturally took over the region and became the territorial lord appointed by the Kenshin. Moreover, this force would do its best to stabilize the region with its own forces and methods. They would eliminate the forces and disasters left behind by the previous territorial lord and save the common people of the entire region, restoring everyone's freedom. This way, this force would be able to quickly stabilize the region and obtain the gratitude and support of hundreds of millions of people. Just like that, the previous territorial lord was replaced by an enemy before he even met the imperial tutor. When the territorial lord heard the news, he was furious. Chapter 41:16. In less than 2 days, the news spread throughout the boundless heaven continent. In any case, the people of the entire continent had been paying attention to the movements of the rebel alliance and the imperial tutor in the past few months. Many territorial lords, major forces, empires, and hundreds of millions of people were discussing the battle situations, strategies, and movements of both sides every day. When everyone learned of the tragic end of the two territorial lords, they were all surprised by the Rebel Alliance's ability to adapt. 2 days ago, the people of the entire Boundless Heaven continent were still lamenting that the Imperial Tutor's plan was very good. He could seize the initiative and put the Rebel Alliance in a dilemma. They did not expect that in the blink of an eye, the Imperial Tutor's plan would be broken by Xianxia. Didn't you summon those territorial lords to gather at the Dark Night domain? You want us to come empty-handed without being able to divide our forces to occupy the various domains? Fine, then we'll directly destroy those territorial lords' cave abodes, kill all the soldiers under his command, and destroy the foundation of his forces. Moreover, we can also support other forces to replace you as territorial lord and throw the entire domain into chaos for you. Those territorial lords of yours who escaped did not even reach the Dark Night domain before their life's work was destroyed. Are you angry? Let me ask you, are you angry? When countless territorial lords, empires, and top forces heard this news, their hearts were heavy, melancholy, and worried. As for those who remained neutral and watched the show, they watched with relish and commented on the plans of both sides. As for the hundreds of millions of people, of course, they cheered and applauded. They recognized and worshipped Xianxia even more. Who said that Xianxia only had powerful strength and did not have shrewdness and schemes. No matter how good the Imperial Tutor was at scheming, wasn't he still easily crushed by Xianxia? Did you think that Xianxia would not kill people just because he spoke on behalf of Tianqing? The name of Xianxia was built on the accumulation of millions of lives. When it came to Xianxia's brilliant military exploits and shocking achievements, it could be talked about for 3 days and 3 nights. Just like that, the entire Boundless Heaven continent was boiling with excitement and panic. The dozens of territorial lords who were watching the situation had the most complicated and tormented feelings. They had been waiting to see how the Rebel Alliance would deal with the Imperial Tutor's plan. Now the results were out. The Rebel Alliance's attitude was very unyielding. If these domain lords dared to flee, then they would uproot their forces. If you don't want to be the domain lord, then I'll choose someone else. Anyway, the Boundless Heaven continent had many forces. There were also many Divine King powerhouses who wanted to be the region lord. With the Rebel Alliance's support and the Xianxia's approval and conferment, any deity king could become a ruler. Realizing this, the dozens of domain masters began to panic. As the Rebel Alliance's 2 armies continued to advance, they conquered more and more territories. The domain lords did not have much time left and had to make a decision as soon as possible. This time, other than those who were truly loyal to the Shura God Emperor, those who still had hope in the Shura God Emperor would choose to bring their families to the Dark Night domain. The other 90% of the domain lords chose to preserve their power and status, and remained in their respective domains. It was fine if they did not leave. As long as they obediently admitted defeat and surrendered, the Xianxia would definitely not kill them. The position of Region Lord would still belong to them. If they dared to flee to the Dark Night domain, even if they saved their lives, they would lose their life's work and the position of Region Lord. Time passed quickly. The Boundless Heaven continent had been in chaos, bustling and clamoring. Almost every 2 days, there would be new news about which domain the Rebel Alliance had conquered. Among those territories conquered by the Rebel Alliance, which domain had abolished slavery. Hundreds of millions of people had regained their freedom and no longer had to be oppressed and exploit resources all day long. A few days later, another force, a well-known Divine King powerhouse, was killed by the Rebel Alliance. It turned out that a certain powerhouse was actually a loyal lackey of the Imperial Tutor despite his sanctimonious appearance. Just like that, the Rebel Alliance continued to spread new news, and the Xianxia's reputation grew. On the other side, the Dark Night domain had also gathered 36 region lords and hundreds of Divine King powerhouses. However, the Imperial Tutor had gathered such a terrifying number of powerhouses and military strength, but he still held back and did not launch a counterattack. The hundreds of millions of people in the Boundless Heaven continent were discussing this. Logically speaking, the Imperial Tutor's military strength was several times that of the Rebel Alliances. If he took the initiative to attack, he would definitely be able to easily destroy the Rebel Alliance's 2 armies. What was the Imperial Tutor trying to do? Why did he not counterattack? Was he going to defend the Dark Night domain to the death and let the Rebel Alliance conquer all the domains one by one? This was definitely the stupidest and most useless method. Even the people thought so. Of course, the Imperial Tutor would not do so. Therefore, countless people were speculating that the imperial tutor was definitely plotting some conspiracy. The rebel alliance was still attacking cities and strongholds, sweeping through the various domains like the autumn wind sweeping the fallen leaves. However, Ji Tianxing realized that the situation was not so simple, and he also smelled the scent of a conspiracy. He repeatedly reminded the 9 major forces under his command that they must not underestimate the enemy and must be cautious. He had a premonition that it wouldn't be long before the imperial preceptor made his move. Just as expected, the imperial tutor was still overseeing the Dark Night domain, and on the surface he seemed to be doing nothing. In reality, he had already mobilized more than 400 god kings and more than 30,000 divine lords to gather in the Dark Night domain. In the past 2 months, these soldiers had already formed an inescapable net in the Dark Night domain, forming layers of barriers and defensive lines. At the same time, he secretly sent a team to quietly rush to the south of the Boundless Heaven continent without anyone knowing. He named that team the God Slayer in reference to the killing of the Kenshin. The God-punishing army was led by 2 protectors. It was made up of 50 god kings and 5,000 god monarchs. The 2 guardians leading the team had been guarding the Azura Divine Palace for thousands of years and had almost never appeared in front of the world. The strength and status of the 2 guardians were on par with the patrol commander Qi Yan. The 50 god kings in the team were made up of 40 patrol commanders and 10 god generals who had been through hundreds of battles. After the Meng Shuai was killed, the god generals under his command were leaderless, and the imperial tutor took over. These god generals had participated in the War of the Gods 1,000 years ago, and now they were all at the 8th heaven of the god king realm. This was the weakness of the 40 patrol commanders. The strongest was a 7th heaven realm god king, and the weakest was a 5th heaven realm god king. Even so, this team of more than 5,000 people was enough to destroy the Rebel Alliance's southern army. The 5,000 God Slayer members rode on 2 king-grade upper-grade divine ships and quietly rushed to the south of the continent. Their speed was not fast, but their priority was to hide their tracks and auras, and they could not be detected by anyone. In fact, the imperial tutor did not use the domain masters, but used the patrol commanders and god generals to keep it a secret. Now his trust in the domain masters was greatly reduced. Even though the imperial tutor stayed behind to guard the Dark Night domain, he was constantly in contact with the God Slayer, so that he could react according to the situation. The Rebel Alliance's northern army seemed weak, but it was personally led by Kenshin, and the imperial tutor knew that he could not afford to provoke it. Therefore, the God Slayer's goal was to destroy the southern army. Chapter 41:17. Ji Tianxing had a premonition that the imperial tutor was up to something. However, he could not predict the future, nor could he guess the imperial tutor's plan out of thin air. Therefore, other than reminding the few forces under his command to be careful, he could not make any other arrangements. He was not too worried about the northern army that he was leading. As long as he was not separated from the Phoenix clan, Yuchi clan and 100 Refinement's ancient sect, these 3 forces were very safe. Jin Shuang, Qi Yan and Meng Shuai were all killed by him. His invincible strength was known to the world. As long as the imperial tutor was not crazy, he would not send people to attack his northern army. Therefore he was most worried about the southern army. Although the southern army was made up of 6 forces, there were more than 6,000 people in total. It seemed that this army was strong and had many powerful people. They were not to be trifled with. However, that was relative. To the domain lords of the various regions, it was naturally a force that they could not contend against. However, to the imperial tutor it was obviously a pushover. After all, the soldiers that the imperial tutor gathered were in the tens of thousands. Considering this point, Ji Tianxing sent 3 messages to Nangong Buhua within 5 days, reminding him to be careful and not to be arrogant. He did not know if it was a reminder from the heavens or a premonition. Ji Tianxing had a trace of uneasiness in his heart, and it was getting more and more serious. This was the premonition of a powerful person. Although he could not really predict the future and deduce the secrets of the heavens. However, he could sense and be alert, and he could tell that the uneasiness was related to the southern army. After sending 3 messages, Ji Tianxing did not mention this matter again. He led the Phoenix clan, Yuchi clan and 100 Refinement's ancient sect to the north of Yenshu Grotto Heaven, conquering various regions along the way. With him personally holding the fort, those territorial lords who did not escape to the Dark Night region were very sensible. As soon as he appeared, they immediately bowed their heads and obediently recited the oath of surrender. After surrendering, those domain lords had to intentionally show their loyalty, or try to curry favor in front of Ji Tianqing by volunteering to carry out some missions. However, as usual, Ji Tianqing did not assign them any tasks. He only asked them to maintain the stability of the region and restore the freedom of the people as soon as possible. If there were any orders or missions, he would send out orders to inform these domain masters. Just like that, 7 days passed by peacefully. Ji Tianqing led the northern army and conquered 7 regions in a row. In order to speed up their journey, he simply asked the 3 forces to retrieve their respective divine ships. More than 3,000 soldiers were gathered in his god-slaying battleship. Everyone traveled together and their speed more than doubled. In any case, it was a supreme-grade king-grade divine warship. Its interior was extremely spacious and it could be changed at will. It was more than enough to accommodate more than 3,000 people. The 3 factions expressed their compliance and gladly accepted this. It was good that they could increase their speed and increase their safety. After all, it was Kenshin's flagship. It would definitely be of a higher grade and safer than their own warships. However, when Ji Tianqing led the 3 forces to conquer another region, they were shocked. On this night, the god-slaying battleship sped through the night sky, rushing to the next region. The Shami Grotto Heavens Intelligence Network had already investigated clearly. The next region's domain lord had not escaped. He was still sitting in his cave abode waiting for his death. Or rather, waiting for Kenshin to conquer him. At this moment, Ji Tianqing's uneasiness suddenly became more and more intense. It had already begun to affect his state of mind, making it impossible for him to remain calm. At first he thought that he had been too worried recently, causing him to feel uneasy. However, even after circulating his energy for an hour, he was still unable to suppress his anxiety and uneasiness. Thus, he realized that something must have happened to the Southern Army. Such a strong sense of uneasiness meant that the situation was very serious. He pondered for a moment, then summoned the Divine Phoenix clan leader, Yuchi clan leader, and Su Balian to urgently discuss this matter. After the 3 leaders received the summons, they quickly came to Ji Tianqing's secret room. Lord Alliance Leader, what happened? Lord Alliance Leader summoned us in the middle of the night. Did something big happen? No matter what you are worried about, Lord Alliance Leader, please tell us. We are willing to share your worries. Ever since the Rebel Alliance was established, they had always been victorious. They had never tasted defeat. Now the entire Boundless Heaven continent was spreading the Rebel Alliance's name, praising Kenshin. Even their factions were treated as saviors and heroes by the billions of people. The 3 factions did not pay any casualties, but they received so much praise and support from the people. Of course, they were overjoyed. Perhaps when they first joined the Rebel Alliance, they were still a little uneasy and uncertain about the future. However, now they were 100 times more confident and approved of the Rebel Alliance. In fact, they even wanted to have a real battle to show off their martial prowess and make meritorious contributions. Ji Tianqing waved his hand, indicating that the 3 leaders did not need to be so excited. He said calmly, "In the past few days I had a sudden impulse to use a secret technique to deduce the heavenly cycle and predict good and bad luck. As expected, the Southern Army is afraid of a disaster and may not be able to survive this. Therefore, I will personally make a trip to the south. The 3 factions will each take a warship and rush to the next area. Just act according to the original plan. That zone leader has long had the intention to surrender. He is just waiting for us to arrive and go through the motions. Therefore, you will not encounter any danger on this trip. Things change, you must not fight head-on. Remember to conserve your strength and report to me first." Hearing him say this, the 3 leaders understood what was going on. At the same time, they were also worried about the Southern Army. "Lord Alliance Leader, please rest assured. We will definitely act according to your orders. Lord Alliance Leader, please pay attention to your safety and be careful. Lord Alliance Leader, you are our spiritual leader and the spiritual pillar of the entire Boundless Heaven continent. Nothing must happen to you." The 3 leaders also reminded Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing did not say anything else. He put away the Godslayer warship on the spot and parted ways with the 3 factions. More than 3,000 soldiers appeared in the night sky. The three leaders hurriedly took out the warship and ordered their disciples to board it. Bai Long steered the Godslayer warship and flew south with Ji Tianxing. After flying for 100,000 miles, Ji Tianxing glanced at Bai Long. Seeing that he had only used 80% of the Godslayer warship's power, he said, "No need to conserve your strength. Full speed ahead." Full speed ahead meant giving it their all. Every hour they would use up billions of resources. In a day they would use up close to 100 billion resources. Bai Long was stunned. He looked at Ji Tianxing with some surprise and asked, "Master, is there a need for this? Could it be that the Southern Army has really encountered a disaster?" Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said, "I rarely have such premonitions. Since it has appeared, it must be true. To be safe, we should hurry over and meet up with the Southern Army." Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 41:18. Seeing Ji Tianxing's solemn tone, White Dragon frowned. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, White Dragon stopped hesitating and activated the acceleration array of the deity-slaying battleship. Whoosh! The divine array of the deity-slaying battleship unleashed 120% of its power, increasing the speed of the battleship by 50%. Instantly, the battleship streaked across the sky like a shooting star and headed south. In order to meet up with Nangong Buhua and the others as soon as possible, the deity-slaying battleship had no time to hide its tracks. Ji Tianxing didn't cultivate in the Jiutian 10 Absolutes Tower either. Instead, he stared at White Dragon in the cockpit. Of course, he sent a message to Nangong Buhua first. Then he closed his eyes to rest and waited patiently. In the message, he didn't mention that he was heading south. He only reminded Nangong Buhua to be careful and that there might be danger in the next 2 days. Soon, Nangong Buhua sent a message saying that he was leading the Southern Army to the Billowing Waves region to subdue the Billowing Waves region master. If nothing unexpected happened, the Southern Army would arrive at the Domain Master's cave residence in 12 hours, around noon the next day. Shimi Grotto Heaven's intelligence network had found out that the Billowing Waves region master had always been a neutral party. Even when the Imperial Tutor ordered the Billowing Waves region master to gather at the Dark Night region 3 times, the Billowing Waves region master remained unmoved. It seemed that the Billowing Waves region master was determined to surrender. There wouldn't be any accidents. After Ji Tianxing received Nangong Buhua's reply, he didn't say anything else. As he closed his eyes to rest, he thought to himself, if I were the Imperial Tutor, I wouldn't just sit around and wait for death. I have gathered so many elite soldiers and immortal kings. I have to give them a mission to deal a heavy blow to the Rebel Alliance. Only then can I turn the situation around. With me leading the Northern Army, it's useless for the Imperial Tutor to send anyone. Even if he comes personally, he'll just be digging his own grave. Therefore, the Imperial Tutor is likely to send a very powerful team to the south of the continent secretly to intercept the Southern Army. If he can successfully destroy the Southern Army, he'll be able to destroy the 6 forces of the Rebel Alliance and deal a heavy blow to the Rebel Alliance. At the same time, the Imperial Tutor can redeem his reputation and intimidate the other region masters. Ji Tianxing had made this judgment based on the uneasiness in his heart and the warning signs that had appeared in his mind. He was immersed in his deduction and continued to simulate the thoughts of the Imperial Preceptor. Since they've sent out a team of experts to secretly rush to the south of the continent, their target is the Southern Army. Then they must keep it a secret. Only then will they be able to succeed in one strike. The Southern Army's armies. Unless the Imperial Preceptor has my deduction and calculation ability, it is impossible to intercept and kill the Southern Army on the way. At this point, Ji Tianxing's eyes lit up as an idea flashed through his mind. Could it be the Rippling Waves domain? The Southern Army's current route and goal were very obvious. They were heading for the Billowing domain. With the Imperial Tutor's intelligence network, he would definitely be able to find out about this. Therefore, the Imperial Tutor sending that team of experts to ambush the Southern Army in the Billowing domain was definitely the safest choice. However, on second thought, Ji Tianxing felt that something was amiss. But the Billowing domain's ruler isn't loyal to the Azura God Emperor. He's also a person who values his own interests and has no backbone or dignity. He's already expressed his willingness to surrender. How can he cooperate with the Imperial Tutor to ambush the Southern Army? Ji Tianxing's first reaction was that the team of experts couldn't possibly be ambushing the southern army in the billowing domain. But he thought about it again. The more impossible something was, the more careless one would be. Take Nangong Buhua for example. No matter how Ji Tianxing reminded him, he wouldn't take it seriously. At least, Nangong Buhua didn't think that there would be any danger in the billowing domain. The billowing domain's ruler is a fence-sitter. If our alliance finds him first, he'll probably surrender. But he didn't openly betray the imperial tutor. If the imperial tutor's team finds him, he probably won't resist, right? With this thought, Ji Tianxing vaguely guessed the imperial tutor's plan and the location of the southern army's calamity. Therefore, he took out a communication jade slip and prepared to remind Nangong Buhua to be careful of the billowing domain. But after he took out the jade slip, he retracted his hand. After all, he had already sent 4 messages to Nangong Buhua. The contents were roughly the same. They were all reminding Nangong Buhua to be careful and not be careless. If he sent another message, wouldn't Nangong Buhua be annoyed? Would it make him seem too cautious and lose the demeanor of an expert? Most importantly, all of this was just his conjecture and imagination. He didn't have any evidence. If he rashly sent a message to Nangong Buhua, but everything was normal in the billowing domain and nothing happened as he predicted, it would be a huge blow to him. That would definitely be a huge blow to him and affect his prestige. Thinking of this, Ji Tianxing put away the communication jade slip and decided to wait and see. Of course, White Dragon would still drive the god-slaying battleship to the billowing domain as quickly as possible. At the same time, late at night in the residence of the billowing domain's ruler, the mystic realm with a radius of hundreds of thousands of miles was filled with abundant divine power and beautiful scenery. In the center of the mystic realm, there were hundreds of mansions and palaces on a majestic mountain range. Nearly 10,000 elite soldiers lived there. At this moment, thousands of elite masters were hiding in the majestic mountain range under the night sky. These monarch god masters were very skilled in concealment. They merged with the earth and mountains and were almost undetectable. The many palaces in the domain chief's manor were lit as usual. It was as peaceful as usual. However, in the residence of the billowing domain's ruler, a solemn and serious scene was playing out. The billowing domain's ruler and more than 10 god generals were standing in the brightly lit main hall with their hands clasped behind their backs and their heads lowered respectfully. Dozens of god kings stood under the walls and in the corners of the main hall. All of them were full of murderous intent and were glaring at the ruler. 2 white-haired old men in luxurious robes stood before the throne at the head of the table. 8 god kings stood beside them as well. The 2 old men in luxurious robes had the most powerful aura and the most dignified postures. After all, they were not only god kings in the 9th firmament realm, but also the great guardian and second guardian who had guarded the Azura divine palace for many years. What was the billowing domain's ruler in front of these experts? Of course, she had to stand obediently and respectfully and wait for her punishment. At this moment, the great guardian reprimanded her with a cold face. Billowing domain's ruler, you have failed to live up to the God Emperor's trust and title. Your performance this time has greatly disappointed the imperial tutor. In view of your disloyalty, the imperial tutor will take note of you temporarily and hope that you can redeem yourself by meritorious service. Otherwise, I'm here tonight to put you on trial in front of everyone. The second guardian said expressionlessly, I can't trust you for the time being. Therefore, for the sake of our grand plan, you and your generals can only stay in the prison for a few days. Chapter 41:19. Without a doubt. The God Slayer secretly sent by the Imperial Tutor had arrived at the Wavy Wave domain and taken control of the domain chief's mansion. The God Slayer didn't have much hope for the Wavy Wave domain chief, who was a fence-sitter. After sneaking into the domain chief's mansion, the God Slayer took control of the entire secret realm by force. He didn't let anyone in or out and imprisoned all the soldiers in case anyone leaked the information. Then the 2 guardians led a group of god kings to seal off the residence of the Wavy Wave domain chief. Following that, the aforementioned situation and conversation took place. The God Slayer treated the Wavy Wave domain chief like an enemy, which was really chilling. However, the 2 guardians and the Wavy Wave domain chief both knew that no one would show mercy at such a critical moment. Protecting their own interests was the most important thing. Therefore, the Wavy Wave Domain Chief didn't fight back on the spot, nor did he try to send a message to warn the Rebel Alliance. Anyway, his attitude had been wavering. He could accept being loyal to the Azura God Emperor or the Rebel Alliance. As for the result, it depended on which force entered the Domain Chief's mansion first and took control of him first. I will obey the orders of the two protectors. Hearing the second protector's order, the Wavy Wave Region Master bowed indifferently and said, "Protectors, please understand. This subordinate has always been His Majesty the God Emperor and has never changed. Of course, I know it's too late to say anything now. So let me prove it with my actions." The Wavy Wave Domain Chief had made a decision in the short time just now. He would continue to be loyal to the Azura God Emperor. Even if the two guardians and the Imperial Tutor still doubted him, he could redeem himself by stopping the Rebel Alliance and proving his innocence. Unfortunately, the two guardians didn't intend to give him the chance. Now you want to redeem yourself by doing good deeds? Proving your innocence? The Great Guardian raised his eyebrows and squinted at the Wavy Wave Domain Chief with a disdainful sneer. That won't be necessary. You'd better go to the prison and reflect on yourself. With that, the Great Protector waved his sleeve and ordered, "Take him away." Immediately, several armored godly kings escorted the Domain Master, Vice Domain Master, and a dozen divine generals out of the hall. Next, they would be suppressed in a heavily guarded prison until the God Slayer destroyed the Rebel Alliance's southern army. Only then would they be released. The hall was silent for a moment. Before long, one of the God Kings responsible for escorting the Region Lord and the others returned to the hall. He reported to the two protectors, "Protectors, the Region Lord and the others have been imprisoned, and the sealing formation has been activated." The Great Guardian nodded slightly and warned in a solemn tone, "Stay alert and watch over them strictly. Don't let them escape. Most importantly, we have to keep an eye on them day and night. We can't let them spread the news." Everyone knew that the Domain Master of the Wavy Sea Domain wanted to rebel. If at this moment the Domain Master of the Billowing Wave Domain tried to send out a message to alert the Rebel Alliance's southern army, this would be his proof of allegiance. He could take credit for saving the southern army and join the Rebel Alliance. However, the God Slayer's hard work and the Imperial Tutor's meticulous plan would all go to waste. The God King bowed and acknowledged the order. Then he left the hall to carry out his mission. The hall was quiet again. The Great Protector looked at the divine generals and asked, "How's the ambush formation that I asked you to set up?" The leader of the divine generals hurriedly replied, "Great Protector, the soldiers have already completed their mission. They hid very well. I've checked twice and found no problems." The Great Protector nodded and said to the second protector, "I'm afraid that the ambush formation is not enough. We have to take action as well. While the southern army of the Rebel Alliance hasn't arrived yet, let's try to set up 2 more formations in half a day." The second protector thought for a moment and nodded in agreement. "If we use 36 God Kings to help us set up the formations, it shouldn't be difficult to complete." After the discussion, everyone started to move. Half a day passed quickly. At noon the next day, several divine warships flew across the sky in a formation and approached the palace of the Surge Domain rapidly. Obviously, the southern army of the Rebel Alliance had arrived on time. The entrance to the secret realm was already in sight. In the divine warships of the 6 forces, the disciples of each clan finished their rest and started to prepare for battle. The clan leaders and elders of each clan also gathered in the hall of the divine warship. They were ready to give orders at any time. The divine warship in the lead was the Nangong clan's warship. More than 1,000 disciples of the Nangong clan were ready to set off. They were in high spirits. Nangong Buhua, Nangong Nihuang, and several elders stood in the hall and looked at the entrance of the secret realm with their divine senses. The Alliance Master has already reminded us 3 times to be careful. We have been very cautious and didn't encounter any accidents along the way. Now we have arrived on time. The Surge Domain Master, that fence-sitter, has already shown signs of surrendering. I think that when we arrive at the entrance of the secret realm, there won't even be a battle. They will let us through directly. At that time he won't even have the courage to negotiate. He will just swear the oath of surrender." Nangong Buhua looked ahead and said with a smile. The elders nodded in agreement. They all laughed and talked, making fun of the Surge Domain Master. Only Nangong Nihuang remained calm. She reminded her father appropriately. "Father, since young Master Long has warned us 3 times to be careful, something must have happened. He has divine powers that we can't imagine. He must have sensed something. That's why he is so serious. Even if we arrive at the Surge Domain Master's mansion, we can't let our guard down." Nangong Buhua nodded seriously and said, "Ni Huang is right. Young Master Long is not an alarmist. He must have his reasons for being so cautious." After pausing for a moment, he thought of an idea and said to Nangong Ni Huang, "Send a message to the other 5 clans. Tell them to stay alert. We, the Nangong clan, will go to the entrance of the secret realm and enter the Surge Domain Master's mansion to check out the situation. Let them follow behind us. They can come in after I make sure it is safe." Normally, a leader would let the other clans under him test the enemy's situation. They would be cannon fodder and die. However, as the deputy leader of the rebel alliance, Nangong Buhua knew that there were a few clans who were not convinced. He didn't want to let Ji Tianxing down, so he worked even harder. Not only did he take the lead in carrying out the mission, but he was also the first to go when there was danger. He helped the other clans to scout the way and bring up the rear. He did this because he didn't want to give others a reason to criticize him. He wanted the other clans to be convinced that the Nangong clan had sacrificed the most. He deserved the position of deputy leader. Chapter 41-20. Nangong Ni Huang and the other elders saw how selfless Nangong Buhua was. Everyone had complicated expressions. They wanted to persuade Nangong Buhua that there was no need to do this. But they could not say it out loud. They knew what Nangong Buhua was thinking. Nangong Ni Huang still followed the order and sent a message to the other 5 families. However, the leaders of the 5 families had different thoughts when they received the message. They told the elders of Nangong Buhua's order, and everyone started to discuss it. "We arrived at the entrance of the mystic realm together. Of course, we have to go in together to find the wavy zone ruler. What is Nangong Buhua doing?" He made it sound nice. He said that he was afraid of danger and wanted to check out the situation first. It seems that he would rather sacrifice the Nangong clan to protect us. But who knows what he is really thinking? The wavy zone ruler has already shown her intention to surrender. She is a fence-sitter. What danger can there be? The way I see it, he's probably trying to steal the credit. That's right. All along, the 6 families have been successful when working together. However, merits that were too hard to obtain were not considered merits. Nangong Buhua is too weak to be a deputy leader. Of course, he wants to gain credit as soon as possible. What does the leader see in Nangong Buhua? When the leader returned to the Boundless Heaven continent, he would definitely be stronger than the Nangong clan if he went to our Lan family. Nangong Buhua is so lucky to become the deputy leader. In terms of status, experience and strength, how can he be compared to our War God clan? We respect the Kenshin, but that doesn't mean we have to lower our heads to the Nangong clan. Don't listen to Nangong Buhua. He wants to take credit for himself. Let's not let him succeed. Nangong Buhua doesn't live up to his title as the deputy leader. He knows it himself. That's why he wants to gain more credit so that he can have a clear conscience. But we can't let him have his way. Even though the 5 families had split up and each took a divine ship, they all had the same reaction when they received the news. All the clans thought highly of themselves and felt that the Nangong clan was not as strong as them. Nangong Buhua was not fit to be the Vice Alliance Master. Even if Nangong Buhua wanted the Nangong clan to be cannon fodder, they didn't appreciate it and even thought that Nangong Buhua wanted to steal the credit. Thus an awkward scene appeared. As they approached the entrance of the secret realm, the battleship of the Nangong clan took the lead and headed straight for the entrance. According to the plan, the warships of the other 5 families should slow down and stay 10,000 miles away to observe the situation. After the Nangong clan entered the Grotto Heaven and ascertained that it was safe, the battleships of the 5 clans would follow. But now, the battleships of the 5 families showed no signs of slowing down. They continued to follow the battleships of the Nangong clan and rushed towards the entrance of the secret realm. At the sight of this, Nangong Buhua frowned and his face darkened. However, he did not get angry. Instead, a look of self-mockery flashed across his eyes. Seems that this seat has been thinking too much. Looks like their prejudice towards this seat is not something that can be dispelled overnight. Nangong Nihuang and the elders all looked angry and couldn't help but discuss. Those 5 families actually disobeyed the order? Do they still have any respect for the deputy alliance leader? Don't talk about it. They have always been unhappy that our clan leader has become the deputy alliance leader. Damn it. Even if they have prejudice against our clan leader, they can't treat a military order as a joke. That's right. If something happens and the alliance leader pursues the matter, can they bear the responsibility? The elders were filled with righteous indignation and couldn't wait to reprimand the 5 families. Nangong Nihuang also frowned and said indifferently, "Stop discussing and focus on preparing for the battle. Report this matter to the alliance leader after the battle and he will naturally deal with it. What we need to do is to do our best to complete the mission. We can't disappoint the alliance leader and can't embarrass him." The elders quickly nodded in agreement and stopped discussing this matter. They suppressed their anger and remained calm as they began to mobilize the disciples of the Nangong clan. Swoosh. The battleship of the Nangong clan arrived at the entrance of the secret realm and quickly stopped. The cabin door opened and Nangong Buhua rushed out first. Nangong Nihuang and the 5 elders led 1,200 disciples and rushed out of the battleship in a mighty manner. Swoosh. In a short while the Nangong clan had surrounded the cloud platform at the entrance of the secret realm. There were more than 100 elite guards on the cloud platform floating in the sea of clouds. They were guarding the array altar that led in and out of the secret realm. They were also vigilant and alert. When they saw the battleship attacking, they had already sent a message to the people in the secret realm. When the disciples of the Nangong clan surrounded the cloud platform, the 100 guards quickly waved their divine weapons and launched an attack fearlessly. Suddenly, an overwhelming divine light shrouded the sky and covered the scorching noon sun. Seeing this scene, the people of the Nangong clan were stunned and somewhat incredulous. What's the situation with the guards of the Billowing Waves domain chief's mansion? More than 100 guards surrounded by thousands of our troops have the courage to take the initiative to attack. They are courting death. The situation doesn't look good. Didn't they say that the Billowing Waves domain chief had the intention to surrender? I didn't see that at all. Although these thoughts flashed through their minds, their hands were not idle. They immediately launched a counterattack. Kill them. Those who stand in the way of our army shall be killed without mercy. Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang gave the order decisively. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Instantly, more than 1,000 disciples of the Nangong clan, who were ready to attack, unleashed violent divine power and unleashed destructive divine skills. The divine skills that covered the sky and the sun, as well as various kinds of wind, fire and lightning, poured down like a torrential flood and drowned the 100 guards. Boom, 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 boom. The divine skills of the two sides collided with deafening loud noises that spread over a radius of tens of thousands of miles. The divine spell attacks of the guards were directly blocked and shattered. They had no lethality to speak of. However, a round of attacks from the disciples of the Nangong clan defeated the 100 guards and killed or injured many of them. The guards were instantly defeated. More than 100 of them were killed on the spot. Not even their corpses were left. More than 50 people who were lucky enough to survive were also severely injured. They were dripping with blood and struggling at death's door. At this moment, the 5 families also sent out a large number of disciples to join the battle. The dozens of guards who were lucky enough to survive turned around and retreated without hesitation when they saw that the situation was not good. Since they were going to escape back to the Mystery Realm, they had to activate the array altar and open the entrance to the Mystery Realm. After they passed through the oval-shaped light door and escaped back to the Mystery Realm, it was too late to deactivate the array. Nangong Buhua, Nangong Nihuang and the others chased after them. They killed several guards who deactivated the array and led the way into the Mystery Realm. Chapter 41-21. When the Nangong clan rushed into the secret land, the entrance to the secret land had been breached. Nangong Buhua and Nangong Nihuang led the Nangong clan disciples to chase after the 50 fleeing guards. The 5 clans followed them and entered the secret land in a single file. After they entered the secret land, several battleships followed them in. More than 6,000 Nangong clan disciples rushed to the center of the secret land and headed straight for the master of the wavy zone. 6 battleships followed them closely, escorting them on both sides and monitoring the surroundings. Of course, the 5 clans only wanted to rush forward and not let the Nangong clan take the lead. Nangong Buhua, who was at the front, was thinking about something else. This is too strange. The master of the wavy zone has been thinking about surrendering for a long time. Since he hasn't run away, he must surrender when we arrive. Even a fool knows that he can't resist because that's suicide. He doesn't even need to sacrifice the 100 guards at the entrance of the secret land. Even if he wants to put on a show, he doesn't need to sacrifice the lives of 100 guards. Is young Master Long right? Has the situation changed? At the thought of this, Nangong Buhua felt a sense of danger and slowed down his speed. He focused more of his attention on monitoring the movements around him. He thought that if the master of the wavy zone wanted to play some tricks, he would probably set up traps and ambushes. As long as he was careful and didn't fall into his trap, he could gain the upper hand and take the initiative. However, the Nangong clan followed Nangong Buhua's order and slowed down. However, the 5,000 Nangong clan disciples didn't slow down at all. Instead, they took the opportunity to speed up and chase after the 50 fleeing guards. We have more than 5,000 people. Can't we deal with those 50 injured guards? If those guards escape back to the master's mansion, we'll lose face. What does the master of the wavy zone want to do? If he wants to surrender, he should surrender. How can he let the guards resist? In that case, let's teach him a lesson. We must kill those 50 guards to intimidate the master of the wavy zone. The 5 clans all had the same idea. In fact, they did succeed. The 50 heavily injured guards weren't able to escape fast enough. It didn't take long for the 5 families to catch up. There were more than 200 of the clan disciples at the front. Each of them used a divine ability and killed the 50 or so guards. Moreover, their deaths were extremely miserable. They died without an intact corpse, their bodies smashed to pieces. After killing more than 50 guards, the 5 clans could finally hold their heads high and regain their valiant aura. They did not slow down. Instead, they charged toward the domain chief's manor in an extremely confident and domineering manner. When Nangong Buhua saw their posture, he hurriedly shouted to remind everyone to slow down and be careful of the enemy's ambush. But how could the people of the 5 clans listen? Many of the patriarchs and elders revealed playful smiles. The disciples of the various clans all laughed out loud, and some even opened their mouths to mock and ridicule. Haha, there are over 10,000 people in the domain chief's mansion, but only about 1,000 divine emperors with fighting capabilities. Even if they wanted to resist and set up an ambush, what's the point? The alliance of our 6 clans is made up of elite soldiers. Why should we be afraid of a mere domain lord? What's wrong with Nangong family head? Why did he become so timid and overcautious? Could it be that he failed to take the credit, so he's thinking of other ways? Haha, that's very likely. The Nangong family head, don't bother. Even if the Nangong family doesn't show up, we can easily deal with the domain chief by watching from the sidelines. Many bold disciples of the clans even started to mock Nangong Buhua. When the people of the Nangong family heard these words, they were all angry. Many hot-blooded men were so angry that their lungs were about to explode. They glared at the disciples of the various clans. However, Nangong Nihuang had already given a strict order that no internal strife was allowed. Otherwise, they would be punished according to the most severe clan rules. Therefore, the people of the Nangong family could only endure for the time being. Nangong Buhua was angry and helpless when he saw that the 5 clans didn't obey his order or listen to his advice. However, he didn't have any good ideas at the moment, and he couldn't change the prejudice of the 5 clans against him in the short term. For the time being, he could only take the overall situation into consideration and endure this humiliation. At the same time, he prayed silently in his heart that he was just being paranoid and that there wouldn't be any accidents. Otherwise, if the southern army suffered heavy losses, he, as the leader and deputy leader of the army, would have to bear the blame. After all, Kenshin trusted him so much that he gave him full authority over the Nangong family's army. Unknowingly, 15 minutes had passed. More than 6,000 people of the southern army arrived at the domain chief's mansion under the cover of 6 battleships. Along the way, the people of the various clans released their divine senses and used their ultimate skills to repeatedly check the situation in the secret land. Even Nangong Buhua was very cautious about the surroundings. However, there were no accidents along the way and the army wasn't ambushed. In front of them was a lofty mountain range, and palaces and mansions were built on the peaks of each mountain. It was a splendid sight. The armies and battleships of the 5 clans pressed forward majestically. They were very confident and domineering. They landed above the domain chief's mansion and looked down at the entire mansion from above. When they saw that the palaces and mansions below them were in chaos, a loud ear-piercing sound rang out. An ear-piercing alarm sounded and a powerful bugle horn sounded. More than 1,000 guards ran in a panic. Seeing this, the crowd was not nervous or worried at all. Instead, they smiled contemptuously. Soon after, more than 1,000 guards gathered in the square and flew into the sky to confront the southern army. Then the crowd realized that the situation was not good. Lan Wuji, the war god clan leader, and the Xia clan leader all frowned and shouted at the guard commanders, "Are you the only guards in the entire domain chief's mansion? Where is the domain chief of the Below domain? Where is your deputy? The southern army of the rebel alliance is here. Ask the domain chief of the Below domain to come out and talk. The domain chief of the Below domain only sent these small fries to deal with us. She has underestimated us. Domain chief of the Below domain, I'll give you 3 breaths to show yourself. Otherwise, don't blame us for being rude." The patriarchs all had aggressive auras as they questioned the other party in a domineering manner. Cave Master Shimi even used his divine power to shout out loud to force the domain chief of the Below domain to show herself. Nangong Buhua didn't say anything, but his face was solemn, and the uneasiness in his heart grew stronger. At this moment, 2 white-haired elders flew out of the domain chief's mansion, followed by 18 god kings. They came to the sky and looked at the disciples of the 6 clans with cold smiles. The domain chief of the Below domain is reflecting on her mistakes in the prison. Clan leaders, I've been waiting for you for a long time. The book guest house reading website. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.